In an uncertain world, understanding data is more important than ever. It can help organisations make informed decisions, face ongoing challenges with confidence, and prepare for an uncertain future. The Centre for Business Analytics works with organisations to unlock the power of data so they can make factual, proactive decisions that deliver competitive advantage. Our educational programs provide powerful learning opportunities for executives looking to transform decision-making through business analytics. We provide access to a premium analytics ecosystem, which includes world-class academics and research experts, along with early access to analytics talent who speak the language of business, technology, and mathematics to drive value and navigate change. Through the power of analytics, we are empowering organisations to put their future into their hands.
At SAS, we love bold questions, outrageous and impossible questions. The answers are waiting to be discovered because space isn't the new frontier. Data is. And with the right questions and the right analytics, we make data do amazing things. Like make the world safer, faster, healthier, and kinder. All we have to do is ask the data, analyze it, shape it, and make it work smarter for everyone, everywhere. With SAS, you can turn data into answers and ask the questions that move the world forward. SAS, curiosity forever.
AI in the enterprise is all the rage. But put the hype aside. How are today's organizations actually executing and seeing value from enterprise AI? Dataiku is the platform, democratizing access to data and enabling companies to build their own path to enterprise AI. To make enterprise AI a reality, Dataiku provides one simple user interface for data preparation, data exploration, automated machine learning, model deployment, AI monitoring, and management. Dataiku is built for everyone with robust features for both the code-free and the code-first. From business users and analysts to data scientists and engineers, Dataiku makes working with data faster and smarter. Each company's path to enterprise AI looks different, so Dataiku supports the creation of a spectrum of applications. Whether that means building out a self-serve analytics platform or fully operationalized AI integrated with business processes. No matter what the underlying changes in architecture or advancements in technology, Dataiku remains at the center, the cornerstone of data governance and responsible AI. Dataiku's centralized, controlled, and elastic environment fuels exponential growth in the amount of data, the number of AI projects, and the number of people contributing to such projects. Dataiku, for every industry, every use case, and also for everyone. Discover your path to enterprise AI at dataiku.com.
People have got a unique thing about them, which is not only are they awesome technically, but they feel a sense of belonging. We genuinely call ourselves a family. Genic was started out of a desire to start something from scratch that tried to tackle the data market with a new and fresh approach.
Our vision is to never settle on a technology, to be constantly chasing the unicorn.
The space is moving really quickly, and we see it as our job to be aware of new things coming, and when they are good things, be able to introduce them to our clients.
Databricks is the data and AI company. We help data teams solve the world's toughest problems. They can't be solved in silos. They can't be solved by one person. We need all the data, all the science, all the brain power in one place on the only open, unified platform for data management, business analytics, and machine learning.
In an uncertain world, understanding data is more important than ever. It can help organizations make informed decisions, face ongoing challenges with confidence, and prepare for an uncertain future. The Centre for Business Analytics works with organizations to unlock the power of data so they can make factual, proactive decisions that deliver competitive advantage. Our educational programs provide powerful learning opportunities for executives looking to transform decision-making through business analytics. We provide access to a premium analytics ecosystem, which includes world-class academics and research experts, along with early access to analytics talent who speak the language of business, technology, and mathematics to drive value and navigate change. Through the power of analytics, we are empowering organizations to put their future into their hands.
At SAS, we love bold questions, outrageous and impossible questions. The answers are waiting to be discovered because space isn't the new frontier. Data is. And with the right questions and the right analytics, we make data do amazing things. Like make the world safer, faster, healthier, and kinder. All we have to do is ask the data, analyze it, shape it, and make it work smarter for everyone, everywhere. With SAS, you can turn data into answers and ask the questions that move the world forward. SAS, curiosity forever.
AI in the enterprise is all the rage. But put the hype aside. How are today's organizations actually executing and seeing value from enterprise AI? Dataiku is the platform, democratizing access to data and enabling companies to build their own path to enterprise AI. To make enterprise AI a reality, Dataiku provides one simple user interface for data preparation, data exploration, automated machine learning, model deployment, AI monitoring, and management. Dataiku is built for everyone with robust features for both the code-free and the code-first. From business users and analysts to data scientists and engineers, Dataiku makes working with data faster and smarter. Each company's path to enterprise AI looks different, so Dataiku supports the creation of a spectrum of applications. Whether that means building out a self-serve analytics platform or fully operationalized AI integrated with business processes. No matter what the underlying changes in architecture or advancements in technology, Dataiku remains at the center, the cornerstone of data governance and responsible AI. Dataiku's centralized, controlled, and elastic environment fuels exponential growth in the amount of data, the number of AI projects, and the number of people contributing to such projects. Dataiku, for every industry, every use case, and also for everyone. Discover your path to enterprise AI at dataiku.com.
People have got a unique thing about them, which is not only are they awesome technically, but they feel a sense of belonging. We genuinely call ourselves a family. Genic was started out of a desire to start something from scratch that tried to tackle the data market with a new approach.
Our vision is to never settle on a technology, to be constantly chasing the unicorn.
The space is moving really quickly, and we see it as our job to be aware of new things coming, and when they are good things, be able to introduce them to our clients.
Welcome everybody to day 3 of this fabulous conference. I want to start off by acknowledging on behalf of Melbourne Business School Centre for Business Analytics that we are meeting on traditional land of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders both past, present, and emerging, and elders from other communities who may be here in our audience today. Welcome everybody, and I'll just give you a quick preview of the fabulous talks that we have on for today. We start off with drip pricing by Steve Tadelis, and I'll talk more about that when I introduce Steve in a few minutes. Then we have Julie Farrago from Verily Life Sciences, which is a company owned by Alphabet, which of course is a company that owns Google. We also then have talks by a number of other speakers, Seth Dorbin and Eyal Steinberg from IBM. We have Lee Hicken from Microsoft. We also have James Cameron from Airtree Ventures, and then we have Glenda Crisp from National Australia Bank, who also sits on our advisory board. We have a number of people who will be introducing these folks too, and I think you'll see Hugh Williams here a couple of times today during the talks to do the moderation as well as the introductions. So stay tuned for a terrific few hours of talks. But first up is Steve Tadelis, who's a professor of economics at University of California, Berkeley, and also holds the Sarin Chair in Leadership and Strategy at Berkeley. Now, many of you already know Steve because he's been a regular fixture in our analytics conferences. So this is the third time Steve is speaking, and I remember from the first time he spoke here that people with one voice said his talk was the best talk of the conference. Now, it turns out you sort of wonder why that is the case. I think that's the case because Steve has a very unique ability to translate very complex things in economics and marketing into something that we can all understand and grasp very quickly. And that unique ability is truly unique. I don't think there are many people out there who can actually do this translation as well as Steve. Perhaps he's one of the best or the best in the world in this respect. So we're really fortunate to have him speak to us today. Steve's going to be talking about drip pricing, and it's an incredibly fascinating topic and a very fascinating piece of research that he's done. He always presents at the conference on research that he has done that has been published in some of the top journals in the world. So it's gone through the rigor of those journals. But what's remarkable is how relevant these papers are, because these papers are usually this research that he's done today, the one that he's presenting today, and otherwise is typically done with real data from field experiments with real companies. And I think that's quite remarkable. It's not a surprise at all that Steve advises Amazon on a part-time basis, and has actually worked at companies like eBay prior to Amazon, but he consults with companies around the world. So look, I can speak a lot about Steve, but I consider myself very fortunate to have him as a very dear friend, and he is a dear friend of the center as well. He's a distinguished fellow at the center, which is terrific for us. And I think you're all waiting to hear from this fabulous speaker, Professor Steve Tadelis. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Ujwal. I hope that I am indeed heard. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I am going to take it away. I should just add that I've seen Ujwal in practice, and he is a very gifted scholar and explainer of difficult concepts too. So I am very touched by your kind words, Ujwal. So I'm going to talk today about drip pricing, as Ujwal said. I'm going to give it a slightly more nuanced title: Price Salience, Product Choice, and Consumer Protection. And this is based on joint research that I did with Sarah Moshari, Tom Blake, and Kane Sweeney. Sarah is a professor of marketing at the University of Chicago. Tom is at Amazon, a senior economist, and Kane just recently switched companies, and I believe He just joined. I'm blanking on which one it is, but he was at eBay with us, and then was at Uber, and then at Mindstrong, and he just recently swapped again. And the research is going to be published at some point soon in Marketing Science, which is one of the marketing journals out there that also specializes, among other things, in quant marketing, where this broadly falls into. So with that in mind, the question that we want to understand better is, how does price salience affect consumer choice? What I mean by price salience is, how clear is it to the consumer what the final price will actually be? And regulatory agencies are getting quite concerned about this. And of particular concern is the ubiquity of this drip pricing, where certain mandatory fees are not shown to the consumer until they hit the checkout page. So a little bit of chronology. In January 2018, the Canadian Competition Bureau sued Ticketmaster. They settled a year and a bit later. In March 2018, the UK's Advertising Standards Authority imposed some pricing transparency requirements that exactly try to ban drip pricing. And in June 2019, there was a hearing conversation by the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, a workshop on online pricing and ticket marketplaces, and the issue of drip pricing was raised there. And of course, the question is, how can drip pricing, or I'll also call this fee shrouding, because we're shrouding the fees until the very end of the consumer purchasing funnel, how are they going to cause consumer harm? So what I'm going to show you is research that was done when we were all involved in one way or another through StubHub.com, which is the largest secondary market for tickets, of course, not in the last year. They may still be the largest secondary market for tickets. It's just that I'm pretty sure that market size now is close to zero with thanks to COVID. But they're no longer an eBay company. They were sold about a year ago, maybe a little more. And they guarantee the transactions, and they have a fee structure where sellers pay a 15% fee from the list price that they list, and then buyers pay a convenience fee that is mandatory. They have no control over that, typically between 15 and 17%. And until 2015, for a little over 2 years, StubHub was showing the list prices, including all the fees upfront. And StubHub stood out compared to the other secondary ticket marketplaces because they all did engage in drip pricing. Now, let me show you what that means here. So what you see here is the event page, the way it looked like before we did our A/B test or experiment, which I will describe in detail. If you look to the top right, because I know you can't see my mouse, it says no surprise fees, only good surprises. And then below is a list of tickets to a very expensive hockey finals game in the United States back in 2015. And you see here the event space with different colors for different regions, and some are more desirable and some are less. And indeed, StubHub was able to basically characterize the more and less desirable regions or areas in that event space. Now, here what you see is that list of tickets drawn on this two-dimensional graph. Every dot here is a ticket for sale. You could see on the left side, the y-axis, these are the prices. As I said, this is a very expensive game. The cheapest ticket is around $200, and the most expensive tickets run into several thousands. Now, what I want to illustrate here, and this is what with the upfront fees, these means the fees include, the prices include all the fees, including that 15 to 17%. And I want you to think about two possible users. Let's start with user one. User one shows up to the site. has a budget of about $180, cannot afford to spend more, and then would look at the tickets. This is not what the user sees, right? The user sees this over here, and he could scroll down the tickets. But in this space where if you go more to the right, these are higher quality tickets. Down here in the orange are the nosebleed seats way up in the corners, and then all the way to the top at the $4, $5, $6, $8,000 range are very front and center tickets. So imagine user one has a budget of about $180, and that user is looking at the prices and sees that the cheapest price is $200. That's that little orange circle that is not that easy to see next to that arrow that points to from user one. And because user one cannot afford $200, user one is not going to purchase a ticket. Now let's take user two that roughly has a budget of about $400. And we could see that the best ticket that user two could buy for $400 is the ticket that the bottom green arrow is pointing at. Now there's another ticket a little bit above and to the right that costs about $450. That ticket is better. It's a little more to the right, meaning it's in a better seating area, but it's also more expensive. And then user two is not going to purchase that more expensive ticket. She will purchase the $400 ticket. Now, this is what would happen to users who approach the site, see the tickets, and then buy what works best for them. What would happen if StubHub would engage in drip pricing? Well, then when they first appear at this page here that I showed you earlier, all the prices are going to look to be about 15 to 70% cheaper. What does that mean? It means that every dot on this graph would drop down by about 15 to 17%, which means that the bottom frontier now looks like the pink curvature here, the pink curve, rather than the gray curve you saw earlier. And two things are going to happen among many others. First, remember, and this is what you see in the circle to the bottom right, that ticket that was $200 that user one would have approached and seen, no, that's too much for me, I only have 180. Well, now that's going to drop by about $30, 15%, and it's going to be about $170. And user one is like, that's awesome. I could now pick this ticket and go to checkout. Similarly, user two, that $450 ticket, well, now it's going to be about $390, give or take. And that's less than 400, and that was my budget. Great, I am able to buy an even better ticket. I'll click on it and go to checkout. So what does this little, caricature of behavior, which in economics we will just call a model, and there's a little more math behind it, but what I described to you really is the way you could think about it. Well, this means that we have theoretical predictions of what would happen if StubHub would go from all-in pricing to back-end fees or drip pricing. First thing, we're going to have a quantity effect. We are going to get more sales. And this is because when fees are shrouded, a consumer is more likely to purchase, as we saw with user one. Certain users who are going to come and say, sorry, I don't have a ticket that's cheap enough in the all-in pricing. Now they think there's a ticket that's cheap enough and they will select it. The second is what I'll call the quality upgrade effect. And that's what we saw with user two. I would have bought a cheaper ticket, but because I'm not seeing the fees, I'm actually going to select a more expensive ticket overall, but I'm only going to learn that at checkout. And the whole idea is coming from the fact that fee shrouding makes tickets seem cheaper, but there has to be another element here, and that there's some friction for reoptimization. What do I mean by that? If I really do have a $400 budget, I'm going to pick the $390 ticket, and then suddenly at checkout, it jumps up to $450, $460, then I should be able to reoptimize, think, oh, okay, there's a 15% fee. Let me go back so I pick a ticket that's 15% cheaper than 400, and then that will be my price. Of course, if people would do that, then hiding the fees means they're going to behave in the same way. And that's what the standard economic model of fully rational agents suggests. But as we know, behavioral economics has received a lot of attention in the last 20 years, even though it really was founded closer to 40 years ago. And through that lens, we're going to have some things like loss aversion. I picked the ticket. I'm surprised at checkout that I have to pay 15% more, but you know what? I'm already attached to it, so let me move on. So now, how are we going to test how people behave differently and whether our theoretical predictions hold water? Well, here you see the two treatments, the A/B test, so to speak. In the upfront fees, which is business as usual at the time, here you would select a ticket. It would show you about $30. That's what you see on the left side, top. And that's what we call our control group. On the right side, that same ticket, instead of being, say, $38, would be $30. I know I'm fudging the math a little. But in the treatment, which are these people, they're not going to see the fees, except when they go to checkout, that's when they'll see the fees. So for the people in the control group, which is business as usual with upfront fees, they are not going to see a change in price when they go to checkout. In the treatment group, they will see a 15 to 17% increase in price. So now, what is the data science or the estimation strategy? We've implemented this experiment back in 2015 in the United States for about 10 days, where 50% of the people who engage with StubHub during that time were placed into treatment, namely drip pricing. And that was many millions of users. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share the number of people. That is confidential information that StubHub didn't want us to reveal. And what are we doing? Well, here I'm showing you a tiny bit of math, but it's a very easy, relatively speaking, approach. It's a very simple A/B test. The QI variable is whether or not a consumer purchased. If they purchased, it's going to be 1. If they didn't purchase, it's going to be 0. The treatment TI says whether this individual I was in treatment or control. If it's 0, business as usual, all-in pricing. If it's 1, drip pricing. And then if you would run this regression, for those who are familiar with this representation of regressions, then beta, this beta here that you see in front of the TI, that would be the estimate of the treatment effect. In other words, by how much more are people likely to purchase a ticket if fees are shrouded, if we have drip pricing. And we're going to report an estimate for beta over alpha, which is the percent increase in purchases, because again, StubHub didn't want to show data that reveals exactly how many people visit or purchase on a weekly basis. Now, the quality effect, how much better a ticket I'm going to buy, is a little trickier, because then I need to know what people would have bought in treatment when they're in control and what people in treatment would have bought when they're in control, and vice versa. And we don't have that. But we do see the prices that people pay in treatment and control. And it turns out that the difference in the average price constitutes a lower bound on that difference in the value quality that these consumers are purchasing. And we could also calculate an upper bound, and the math there is a little more complex. Anyone who's interested, you could go to my webpage, find the paper, read it, and you'll get all the details there. So let me very quickly now jump in and tell you what we found. So we found, there we go, that people who were in the treatment, namely drip pricing, and this is what you see under DQ on the left, they were about 14% more likely to purchase a ticket than people who do not see drip pricing, or in other words, who did not get an unpleasant surprise. So that quantity effect that our theoretical benchmark idea suggests or predicts indeed is borne out in the data. You're 14% more likely to go through with a purchase when you think that the prices are cheaper, and then you get slapped with a fee at the end. And similarly, what you see here in the DP on the right side is conditional on buying tickets. You buy tickets that are about 6% more expensive, which is what we refer to as the quality upgrade effect. And that's that, vignette of user 2. Instead of buying the ticket at 400, they're buying on average the ticket at about 6% more. So those are the main findings. Here's a little illustration that shows the quality upgrade effect in a different way. So we took all the venues that have seats that are like A through Z, where A is the front row, B is the second row, and so on. On the y-axis, you could see the 0. That would mean there's no difference between the drip pricing treatment and the all-in pricing control. But as you see, there's a positive difference for seats A through E, meaning more people buy the A through E when there's drip pricing. And then you see fewer people buying the GHI and the LMN areas, meaning that people indeed get shifted more towards the more attractive seats. Here, what you see is the purchasing funnel. So again, if we take this more seriously, people who always see the same price, they should not be more likely to abandon the cart at checkout, but they may be less likely to move forward with a purchase because initially they see all the expensive prices. Versus the drip pricing people, well, they should be more likely to select the ticket because everything looks cheaper, but they should be more likely to abandon the cart at checkout. And this is exactly what these numbers show. That from the event page to choosing a ticket, you have about 28% of people do that in drip pricing, only about 23.5% do it with the all-in pricing. But then 33% of those who selected a ticket end up purchasing it with all-in pricing. Only 18.5% do that for drip pricing, meaning there's more abandonment of the cart. Another thing that is consistent with this loss aversion or behavioral bias is there's not a lot of reoptimization. So what you see here in the gray are the people who see all the same prices. The fees are included from the beginning. What you see here in the white bars are people under drip pricing. And you see that most of the users in both of these choose to only look at one ticket. We have a little over 80% in the upfront fees and closer to about 75%. So it's true that with the drip pricing, they do view more tickets, but not much more, which very much explains why people are locked in to their purchases. How am I doing on time? I think I am supposed to wrap up in a minute or two. Give me a little input there, Justin, if you will. Okay, so the last thing, two last things that I want to show you. So over here, we looked at inexperienced versus more experienced users. And what we see is that new users or users that have low experience, they're impacted in the same way. And people who've been purchasing a lot more, these are people with more than 10 purchases in the last year, they're a little less influenced, so they seem to be a little more savvy, but they are still influenced by drip pricing. So in other words, everybody gets fooled, but if you're more experienced, you get fooled a little less. In the remaining 2 minutes, let me show you the last thing we looked at and conclude. So after our experiment, StubHub went back to drip pricing, a practice they used to use before and that all their competitors continued using. There was a Wall Street Journal article that came out on August 31 of 2015 when they did that. And here's a quote: less than 2 years after shifting to all-in pricing, ticket resale giant StubHub is reversing course and returning to its old system of adding 15 to 17% in the last minute at checkout. So we've established by their behavior in a very robust way with a nice controlled experiment that consumers are fooled into spending more money. The question is now, what happens on the selling side? Now, as you know, a lot of the sellers on these sites are sophisticated versions of the scalpers who used to buy tickets and then show up outside the venue. I have tickets, anyone interested? Now it's all done online. These are business people who are savvy. And if they are indeed savvy, they should understand that after the change, consumers, users are going to look for more expensive tickets and end up buying them. And lo and behold, what we do here in the last analysis is again split tickets in those venues where we have rows A to Z. You see A to E, F to J, K to O, and P to T. And the two red lines, vertical lines, the first one is when the experiment started. The second one is when it ended. And immediately after that, they had that announcement and the site went to all-in pricing. And you see a new regime shift for the row A to E. Compared to the way it was before, it is now on a new higher plateau that demonstrates that sellers are sophisticated and they're taking advantage of this purchase behavior of buyers that are now more likely to be fooled into purchasing more expensive tickets. So to conclude, price salience matters for two reasons: whether people buy, that's that user one, and what people buy, like user two that you find that little vignette. And the total effect is a lot larger than we thought. And what we also see is that profit-driven sellers are sophisticated enough to react to price salience. And across the world, there are different treatments for this. So in Canada, now doing this drip pricing is going to get you in trouble, but not in the United States, unfortunately. And I would like to see regulators clamp down on this practice, which is not very helpful for consumers. And it's a way for businesses to generate profits that really are coming through a rather dark venue, so to speak. And with that, I will conclude and open to Q&A. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to run, but take it away.
Thank you, Steve. I can take you through how it is run, but look, Steve, thank you so much for that beautiful talk about a very ugly topic. And so clearly it's an ugly topic, and clearly customers are getting ripped off, and sellers are of course just responding to what is allowed. And I think you alluded to that right at the end, saying, look, there is a case for regulation in these markets because consumer welfare is being affected, and so I think that's terrific. So I think you've made the case very clearly. But there are a few terrific questions, and in fact, I'd written down some questions, but the audience has asked very similar questions as well. And the first one is really, you fool them once, you fool them twice, and the third time around, you should not be fooled. Otherwise, you really are a fool. And I hate calling consumers that, but you've got a problem of that sort here, which is, these are not frequent purchases. So these are purchases that people make on an ad hoc basis. So there's a question mark around that aspect. But Jonathan Clark has asked a question very similar to that, which is that, is there a difference between how many customers return for future purchases? And are those that experience drip pricing as likely to return in the future as those who experience full-in pricing? So I think it's a much more articulate way of asking the question that I was trying to ask.
Yes, and that's a great question. Thank you, Jonathan. The slide isn't up there, but one of the things we looked at, and that was in that table I showed you with the main results, there was another line that I didn't mention on churn, and it turns out that people who were fooled, they didn't churn with a higher likelihood. So we don't see that effect. Now, I love, Ujwal, how you refer to the, fool me once, fool me twice. I usually know it as F me once, F me twice, but it works for the fooling too. And it turns out that people are getting fooled quite regularly. Now, I'm going to mention a study that is one of the earliest studies on this fee shroud by Raj Chetty and Croft and Looney, I forget their first names. It's in the American Economic Review of 2009. There, they did a much simpler field experiment in supermarkets here in California, where they posted the prices with taxes, with sales taxes. In the United States, you don't have to present prices with taxes. You only get slapped the taxes at checkout. These are value-added taxes, VAT. And lo and behold, people behave differently. Now, you would think that people should really understand that when we purchase things, there will be taxes at the checkout. But it looks like the way they behave is that they don't internalize it, even for things that they purchase all the time. As an economist, of course, all my models have fully rational agents. But being a human being, I understand that I do stupid things all the time, and so does everybody else.
Well, thank you for that. Now, there's another question which I think you partly answered, but let's answer it again. It's from Stephen Wang. Would consumers spend less overall if drip pricing was outlawed across the board?
Well, people would spend less on those items for which it would be outlawed across the board. Of course, what might happen is that they would spend the same amount, but do it in different ways. So, for example, it might be that those businesses, let's say, if you think of tickets, where most of the time I'm going to buy a ticket for myself, or maybe for myself and my significant other, then I'm not going to buy many more. But maybe if I have an annual budget, right, if I do this kind of compartmentalization of spending, and I'll still spend $2,000 a year on events, I'll just go to one more event, right? So it's not necessarily that people will spend less money, but the research we've done and other research that is commensurate with ours does show that people will spend less per transaction.
Now, we've got a question that of course, is squarely in your area of expertise, Steve, which is competition. And you've done a lot of work in that area. And so Arjuna has asked the question, what is the effect on customer experience? You don't exactly have an option normally for event tickets. It's usually an exclusive ticket agent. Would be great to see this data for things such as airline ticket sites where people do have the option to go elsewhere and if they have a disappointing experience.
Yeah.
So you talked about outlawing, drip pricing, potentially regulating it. One way to regulate it is to actually foster competition. And if you fostered competition, competitors did what StubHub used to do first, which is all-in pricing, or all-up pricing, then perhaps people would just move there. So, any thoughts on that point?
Well, I am going to pause just for a second because I am looking for a quote. And I have a feeling that I'm going to, there we go. So we have a quote in the paper that was the eBay, well, at least I thought we had this quote in the paper, but I can't seem to quickly find it, where a lawyer from eBay who was at this event was discussing the motivation of why StubHub did what they did. And I was actually at eBay and part of these conversations back in 2012 when StubHub switched from drip pricing to all-in pricing. And we actually did a little itsy bitsy kind of experiment on Major League Soccer that showed very similar results. So we knew that StubHub is going to get less sales and of cheaper tickets, and that's going to cost StubHub, but the leadership had the following arguments. We're going to move ahead with this, and in the short run, we know we're going to get hit because what you've shown us makes sense. But very quickly, consumers are going to learn that we are the good guys, and SeatGeek and Ticketmaster and all those other, schmucks that are still doing the drip pricing, they're not kind, and therefore we're going to gain market share. And after that, everybody's going to have to follow suit, and the industry is going to be transformed to all-in pricing. And that argument kind of made sense. And 2 years later, the data showed that it just didn't happen. Consumers really just looked at the initial prices on different sites. SeatGeek, Ticketmaster looked cheaper. And when they were at checkout, they're already stuck there and they just mow ahead and get on purchasing that ticket. So as much as the story of competition should prevent this kind of nasty behavior, well, it turns out that that just didn't happen. And that to me was a surprise. Or another way to put it is that people are even dumber than we think they are.
Well, we'll leave it at that then. Terrific to have you speak with us. Steve, we can't wait to have you back in Australia for multiple reasons. And so thanks so much for taking the time, Steve. We do have to wrap it up and move on to the next presentation, which
My
is also
pleasure.
from the Valley, and it's coming from Verily Life Sciences. So thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Hugh Williams, now to introduce the next speaker. Hugh?
Thanks, Ujwal. Great pleasure to be back with you again this morning here in Australia. It is my great pleasure this morning to introduce one of my dearest friends of all time, Julie Farrago. I can see her appearing on the screen now. It's fantastic. Julie leads software for Verily's healthcare solutions, and Verily is part of the Alphabet Group, which is formerly known as Google. Prior to working at Verily, Julie had a reasonably long career at Google itself, and she'll, I'm sure, tell you some stories about that as she presents this morning here in Australia. Prior to Google, Julie spent some time at a startup, and then before that, I had the great pleasure of working with Julie at Microsoft, where we started the image search team together and had some fantastic adventures. The thing I would say about Julie, in addition to her being one of my favourite people in the world and one of the nicest people I know, is she's one of the smartest people in the world, which I'm sure you will see. Probably in the top 3 smart people that I know, and Julie and I are lucky enough to know Bill Gates, so that puts her in rare company. I think you'll really, really enjoy hearing from Julie this morning. If you do have questions for Julie, I think you all know the drill. There is a question feature. Please put your questions in there, and we hope to have 10 minutes or so at the end with Julie where we can share some of your questions and hear some of her answers. But anyway, Julie this morning is going to share with us a topic that's super interesting: data-driven product development, optimizing your critical user journeys. So great pleasure to hand over to my very good friend Julie, who will take it away. Julie.
Hugh, I don't know if I should say thank you or not for such a high bar introduction, because I'm not sure if I can meet that, but I will I'll try to make this presentation valuable for everybody here. So like you said, I'm at Verily Life Sciences, and I just wanted to start by saying it's a real honor to be here with you all today. I looked through the speakers and the talks that you have over this multi-day conference, and it's a really incredible crew. So I will try and keep pace while we're together. And Hugh touched on this, but I figured since I'm talking about journeys today, I should start with my own. So for a quick background on me, I studied computer science at Harvard. I worked at Microsoft as a product manager on Windows, and then Bing Search, which was called Windows Live Search at the time. That's where I met Hugh. I briefly joined a startup and then spent 8 years at Google working on Chrome, Google+, Android, and Google Play. And then have spent the last 5 years at Verily Life Sciences, which I will get into more later. And what I wanted to focus on today was how you actually go about doing data-driven development. So in all of these roles, I have been surrounded by data, by the promise of data, whether it's capacity planning or market analysis or AI model accuracy or weekly active user numbers. Like we have been suffused with data. And so every one of these businesses has been data driven. But for me, the most profound way to use data effectively was around optimizing critical user journeys. And I'll get into explaining what that is. But another way of putting that is if you really want to focus on engagement and conversion, the way to focus on it is through these critical user journeys. And so what is a critical user journey? So a user journey is a set of steps that a user takes through your product to achieve a goal. So say, for example, you want to update your profile picture on LinkedIn. You would go through a series of steps, click on your profile, click on the picture, upload something new, click save, series of steps to complete that task. A critical user journey is a user journey that is either very high traffic, so there are lots of customers that go through it, or it's high dollar amount, so it has clear revenue impact. And the reason why those are interesting is because those journeys tend to affect customer satisfaction and long-term loyalty the most. So again, if you want to drive engagement, if you want to drive conversion, you really want to focus on the critical user journeys. So whether you have a product that's already launched, or you're designing a new product, or you're trying to debug why you're not getting the engagement and the NPS scores that you'd expect, we'll talk about how to investigate that. So there are a few key steps to using data to make your product engagement and satisfaction really phenomenal. You need to know the right user journeys to focus on, you need to know where the journey starts, and then you need to relentlessly optimize it. And I'll get into examples of what each of these look like. They sound pretty straightforward, but basically, to do any of these, you need to have a way to log the data that users are generating, kind of what steps they're taking, and to decipher it, which you may or may not have today. So let's jump in. Find the right critical user journey. So a couple stories. As Hugh mentioned earlier, he and I worked together at Microsoft, where I was a product manager. And again, I was a product manager on Windows Live Search, later became Bing. And Microsoft at the time really needed delivery, so we needed to ship, but it also needed innovation. And at the time, Microsoft had a white labeled version of image search. It was Yahoo backed. And we had to think about how we could build a better product. So we started looking at the data. And when we did, we found some really interesting insights. So image search used to be a paging model where there were 30 images on the page. I don't know if people remember this, but you would kind of see 30 images, you'd click next page, you'd see 30 more images. And we found that people clicked next page on web search, so on kind of normal search, around 10% of the time, maybe a little less. But for image search, people click next page around 60% of the time. And that really confirmed our suspicion that image was much more of a browsing experience. And we realized that image browse to discover, not quite image search, was actually the critical user journey. So we really had to reframe what were people trying to do and what were they trying to accomplish. Just to put that in context, people wanted to do things like search for haircuts and look at the many different styles of haircuts and explore them all rapidly. Or look for the perfect cute picture of the cat for their slide deck. So anyway, because of this, we redesigned the whole image search UI to be focused on that browse to discover experience by making it a scrolling interface. So it became an infinite scrolling UI rather than a paging model. And that became the standard for image search really across the web. So a couple years later, Google followed suit. And overall for us, this was a huge user win. So it drove high engagement, high user satisfaction, and also ended up being a big PR win for Windows Live Search at the time, which we quite needed. So anyway, again, using data to find what the right journey is. Second trick is know where your journey starts. So in a lot of ways, you can think about a user journey as a funnel. We think about marketing funnels of, we reach out and do they respond, do they actually convert? But really all journeys are actually kind of like a user funnel. So you want to know where the head of your funnel is. And it's often not where your data starts. So often you actually have to start figuring out how to get data from earlier steps. One example of this, so when I came to Google, I got to help lead the Google Chrome V1 launch. And Chrome at the time, it promised to be the best browser ever. It was going to be safer and faster than anything on the market, but we had to get it installed on people's machines. And around this time, for those of you who remember, we would see an average software install success of like 50 to 60%. So when you clicked install, you would see that little progress bar that would take a really long time to download and install something. And often your network connection would die, or you'd walk away from your computer, or for whatever reason it would stop. So only 50 to 60% success rate there. And the user journey started before the browser was installed. It started when they actually clicked install. So we designed a really tiny piece of software that would reliably download and install larger packages like Chrome. And on the day Chrome launched, we had 8 million installs and around a 90% install success rate. So in other words, that like little tiny piece of software for the head of the critical user journey on day one alone resulted in around 3 million more installs than we would have had without it. And over the next month, we increased the install success rate to more than 95%. So again, know where your journey starts because it will have a big impact. Third step is relentlessly optimize it. So again, a story on this one. So later I started Android's first big foray into enterprise by focusing on the strategic vertical slice of education. So we built zero-touch device setup and configuration in the cloud, bulk app purchasing and provisioning. But Android was built with consumers and not enterprises in mind when it was first built. And part of what we found, again, that kind of motivated the whole product was that the IT directors inside schools who championed their school boards for budgets for tablets, they found that their like biggest dream of having all these amazing devices for all their students, it just became their worst nightmare when over the summer they needed to manually set up 1,000 tablets for all their students. So they really needed a zero-touch setup, zero-touch configuration. And similarly, teachers needed to be able to bulk app install applications onto tablets. And they needed it not to fail. Here, it wasn't about what is the actual journey and where's the head, but really how do we actually increase engagement and loyalty by relentlessly optimizing these flows. So we had to find all the hiding failures. And again, a lot of this is about finding the data before you can actually work with it. So we set up massive daily automation tests with setting up new devices and provisioning new content. Did a huge amount of bug discovery and crash reporting, following up on consumer reports. And over time, we achieved better than 99% reliability, both on the setup and the install. And that reliability opened up a huge market for Android in education overall, but enterprise overall. So I'm going to do a deep dive example of how this goes through one entire product with an example in diabetes management. Again, I work at a company called Verily. Verily is spun out of Google. So Google a couple of years ago decided to make Alphabet as a parent company. And Alphabet's goal was to enable innovation in new markets. So to spin up new companies that could focus on markets like healthcare, which is regulated, highly complex, it's an enterprise business. It's a very different market than Google has classically been in. But we have huge potential to have positive impact on people's lives with better software, user-focused design, and well-targeted artificial intelligence. So that's why we started Verily, Google's healthcare company. At Verily, our mission is to make the world's health data useful to help people enjoy healthier lives. So that's the mega goal. And one of our major areas of focus is around chronic disease management. So I won't spend too much time on this slide other than stating that chronic diseases are a global epidemic. So diabetes, heart failure, hypertension, depression, to list a few. The spend on this slide represents massive failures from the perspectives of patients and all of us who, as we look at the cost of healthcare and the impact that has on people's access to healthcare. Just talk about an example. When not treated, something like diabetes results in blindness. It can result in an amputated limb, not untreated hypertension, in strokes, heart failure, and depression, potentially in death. And one of the really kind of sad things here is that we can do better. These are not mysterious or wildly complex diseases to manage. They often come down to helping people make lifestyle changes and get on the right medications. But change is super hard. So if I am diagnosed with diabetes, for example, today, then I would be told, change your diet, start exercising, sleep more, and take these medications. And I will see you in 6 months. And no one can make that sort of change. I mean, no one. It's a superhuman level of change. And so in order to tackle this epidemic of chronic disease, we started a program called Unduo. And we decided to start with a focus on diabetes because the global prevalence is so astronomical. So, if you look worldwide, there is something close to 500 million people who are living with diabetes right now. And as we all know, prediabetes is on the increase, obesity is on the increase by just huge amounts. So again, the need is large. So getting back to critical user journeys, the question that we started with, of course, was what is the right critical user journey to focus on? Where do we start? And it turns out that there is great data about diabetes. It's just inside your body. And when you don't have, so when you don't have diabetes, your blood glucose levels remain pretty stable. So, if I were to kind of measure my blood sugar level over time and I don't have diabetes, then what I'll see is a pretty stable line. It doesn't vary very much. But what you see in this chart here is actually a line that is quite variable. Because when you have diabetes, your body's ability to manage your blood glucose levels your body is less able to manage those levels. And so the blood glucose levels themselves are incredibly telling. And you can really help people demystify how to stay healthy in sustainable ways if you just know what's happening. So again, in this picture here, if I had a bagel for breakfast, okay, it spikes my blood sugar because bagels have a lot of carbohydrates. Then maybe I walk the dog, my blood sugar goes back down. And then maybe I have a coffee with some sugar in it, and my blood sugar goes back up. So, this is what my blood sugar would look like throughout the day. But the real challenge here, and I think I'm missing a couple dots, is that fewer than, why am I not in control? Oh, sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm back in control, maybe. Sorry, I'm seeing a preview. Is everyone seeing my screen? Justin, do you see my screen? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Yes, excellent. Okay, so there we go. So this is what your blood sugar looks like throughout the day. Again, with the bagel breakfast and the dog being walking in the coffee with sugar. But the real challenge is that fewer than 30% of people with diabetes check their blood glucose more than twice a day. And people with diabetes, a lot of them don't check their blood glucose really at all because pricking your finger is painful and it can be embarrassing and it's deeply inconvenient. And when you only have at best 2 data points a day, cause and effect are really difficult to understand. So you see 2 points in time at best, but your but that's not really kind of like what your blood sugar looks like. And there's a missed opportunity here. So what could become insight becomes a mystery. So again, you really can't kind of like map these things. And so this was a critical user journey. Help me understand how my actions affect my blood sugar and what to do about it. And so we built that. So we built a tool to help people understand how a walk, for example, helped drop their blood sugar, how eating a bacon breakfast sandwich maybe increased their blood sugar, how eating a slightly healthier meal with fewer carbohydrates actually had a smaller increase to their blood sugar. And we were able to help users actually understand what to do with that information by building a virtual clinic around that concept, around the concept that we could empower people with a combination of data and care. So our critical user journey really became how do we get a continuous glucose monitor? So again, these devices that you can wear and continuously actually track the blood sugar levels in your body. How do we get a continuous glucose monitor on users and empower them to take control of their health? And once we got a continuous glucose monitor on people, not only could we show them specific insights about specific actions they took, but we could actually use AI to say, hey, these days look similar. So this is a cluster of similar mornings where the blood glucose levels in the body look somewhat similar, which is actually different than this cluster of mornings here. And here we were able to say, it looks like things like that weekday morning breakfast with toast and jam is actually negatively affecting your blood sugar. So you don't need to change everything, just change that one regular breakfast. That's it. And so as a result, we could make specific micro recommendations that would help make an impactful difference and a sustainable one. And it worked. So members, users, they substantially improved their blood glucose levels. For people who had controlled blood glucose levels, they were able to keep them in control, which is major success, so they didn't get worse. And for people with uncontrolled blood glucose levels, they were able to dramatically improve their glucose control. And it kept working. So it didn't just work at first, but it actually was a sustainable change. And again, that's because people were able to make these micro changes in their habits, like their weekday breakfast. And people were able to make those micro changes because they were able to see this immediate positive impact. So again, through that critical user journey, not only did we have engagement, but we also had member satisfaction. So people loved it. Our net promoter scores were extremely high. But again, when we think about this like a funnel, we weren't reaching enough people. So for us, the question again became, know where your journey starts. Just to give you a sense of this is our entire journey. We reach out to people and they register and they meet a coach, and at some point later on, they get a continuous glucose monitor. But we wanted to step back, map the whole journey, and focus on that head of the funnel. So the journey starts early. I'm just going to walk through one example of a way that we focused on the head of the funnel. So we had a key piece of Onduo was actually getting data from a user that that explained a lot of their kind of like coming in health. So that way, a coach was able to better understand what their medical need was and get them to the right care as quickly as possible. But at first, this was a pretty manual process. So we showed a couple of screens, but then a coach got involved. They sent a survey. They had to bother the person to fill out the survey. We only had about a 63% completion rate on this survey, and we couldn't get people to a continuous glucose monitor without that. So we totally redesigned this, and we brought all of the surveying in-house, and we put it all in the onboarding flow. And shockingly, what was a 4-screen thing became 80 screens, but each of them was extremely simple, very conversational, and we addressed the whole person. So not just their condition, but why they were there. So we ended up actually increasing a 63% completion rate to a 93% completion rate, and we saved an extraordinary amount of coach time in the process. But we weren't done. We needed to relentlessly optimize this journey to the continuous glucose monitor. So yet another example of how we did this. This is fake data. But one of the steps to getting a glucose monitor was actually meeting with a doctor. When we launched our telemedicine feature, it was very effective for helping people optimize their medications, for getting on a continuous glucose monitor as well. But the process of scheduling an appointment was very difficult for our team. It spanned a bunch of different systems. There was a long lead time for appointments. There was back and forth on the phone. Like it was inflexible. So the median time to schedule an appointment was 72 hours. So again, we reworked this system end to end, fully integrated into the application experience, and moved to a median time of about 6.5 hours, more than a 10x reduction. And that was mostly the time that was just the user finding the right moment in the day to schedule their appointment. So there's no back and forth needed, and it meant a big increase in telemedicine visits, and again, more flexibility with our team. So again, stepping back, this all resulted in meaningful changes, significant results that were sustained. And the other really nice benefit here is that 95% of the care we were actually able to make self-managed, because when we nailed the critical user journeys of giving people the data in their own bodies and the tools to manage their health, to manage their experience, they could do a lot autonomously. So, like in many cases, the data was there, this time inside of people, but also in the application, and we just needed to connect people to it. So, like I said, find the right user journey, know where it starts, and optimize it. Thanks. I think we're going on to Q&A. There we go.
Julie, you're a star. Super interesting. We've got a few questions from the audience. If I could ask you a couple. So just on Verily and diabetes control. This one comes from John Kenny. How much is the ultimate goal of long-term clinical outcomes being tested? So short-term control of blood glucose was certainly demonstrated, but does that yet equate to real outcomes like less comorbidity or increased quality adjusted life years or some other relevant metric?
That is a fantastic question. There are definitely a bunch of studies linking decrease in A1C levels and better glucose control to lower comorbidity, lower morbidity and mortality, and increased quality adjusted life years. But we are also we have a single-arm study that we're running right now, and the goal is to do an RCT, a randomized clinical trial, to actually show sustained and long-term positive benefit.
And how far away do you think you are from those sort of results, Julie?
So we already actually have a bunch of published results, some of it on real-world data and some of it on early study data. I am not positive when we're planning on the RCT, but it is a regular conversation, so I don't think it's all that far away.
And then one more on the same topic. What was the method of data input for the Verily app? Was it still glucose reading? And this comes from Margaret Webb.
Yeah, so a variety of different tools to get data. One was glucose reading through continuous glucose monitors. The second was actually just app logging. So when I talked about the funnel through telemedicine or through onboarding, that was actually us doing essentially logging of user actions and when they move to different pages, and so building a funnel out of that. Some of it is actually claims data. So when members initially join, some amount of data on what are their kind of preconditions coming in, and then how do we actually help them find the right care rapidly. So a variety of different data sources. Some also step data, step tracking data from integration with things like Apple HealthKit.
And then one from me, I was sort of intrigued by, obviously you and I share the Infinite Scroll story a little bit. Though I've officially retired it, I've got to say, Julie, I'll stop telling that one. But I thought it was interesting just to reflect back on things like that. So I'm curious in your mind, what's the difference between sort of making things up and being data driven when you're trying to make those huge leaps? Because I think to others that seems like a large leap. I think to us that seems data driven. But are we fooling ourselves? Are we really being data driven, or is this a leap?
That's such a good question. I think to me it involves really rapid hypothesis testing. So I think data can often give you a strong hypothesis. You know, like if for example, we saw that kind of next page clicking behavior in image search and how deeply people clicked. And that gave us a solid hypothesis about what would make a difference there. But the next step there is to really quickly vet that. So either get a really quick demo up or get some mocks going or do some user research and then go out and ask a whole bunch of questions and actually try and disprove that hypothesis. You know, try and find all the reasons why you might be wrong. In particular, starting with the most risky aspects of it. So what are all the things that you're not seeing from the data or where the data might be deceiving you that you can go and test? And again, I think that ideally that's also data driven. You know, that's also really looking at the numbers that come back if you're logging users or getting user input. But data is often a really good pointer, but it doesn't actually necessarily tell you what the answer is. The answer takes iteration. The answer takes a lot of iteration.
Yeah, that makes sense. And sort of on that sort of optimization and details, and Melissa Wu's got a really interesting question. She asked if you could just sort of share a little bit more detail on how to relentlessly optimize a customer journey. I think you started down that path.
Yeah. So again, I mean, I think you could really think of it like a funnel, and trying to think about where is the funnel going to and where you're trying to get, and then starting with where are the big drop-off points, then a hypothesis testing mode. So where, for us, that often looks like working very closely with our UX design and research team to really start iterating very quickly on designs, putting them in front of people in very very fast, kind of low cost ways before we build any code, because code is really expensive to build. So again, the data is often, I guess what I'd say is like the pointer to the problem, but the relentless optimization is a lot of times kind of the data is secondary to iteration and user feedback.
And then one more sort of thematically in a similar place. How do you know, this is from Emma Lyle, how do you know when you've actually hit on the right critical user?
Oh, well, yeah, that is such a good question. Well, in a lot of ways that ties back to the business strategy. Just to agree with how difficult that question is, even when we're thinking about something like diabetes, Is the right critical user the person who is super high risk and their diabetes is out of control? Is it the person who is actually in control but really needs some amount of coaching and help to stay there? Is it the person with a lot of comorbidities and diabetes is just one of them and they want the tools to manage them? So it really ends up tying back to what are the metrics that you're trying to optimize at the business level, and what users are you really trying to kind of like work towards reaching, engagement-wise and retention-wise and conversion-wise if you're trying to convert with them.
Terrific. Well, I think, Julie, that's about all we have time for. And in true Julie form, you covered a ton of ground in a super articulate way and gave us a very, very interesting talk. It's a real privilege here at the Melbourne Business School to have you involved in the Melbourne Analytics Conference, and great to see your face on a screen as always. So really, really appreciate your time, Julie. Thanks very much. I think now, ladies and gentlemen, we're actually going to take a short break, and we will see you in how many minutes? In 10 minutes. So we'll see you all back here in 10 minutes. Thanks again, Julie, and enjoy your break, everybody.
Thanks, Paul.
In an uncertain world, understanding data is more important than ever. It can help organisations make informed decisions, face ongoing challenges with confidence, and prepare for an uncertain future. The Centre for Business Analytics works with organisations to unlock the power of data so they can make factual, proactive decisions that deliver competitive advantage. Our educational programs provide powerful learning opportunities for executives looking to transform decision-making through business analytics. We provide access to a premium analytics ecosystem, which includes world-class academics and research experts, along with early access to analytics talent who speak the language of business, technology, and mathematics to drive value and navigate change. Through the power of analytics, we are empowering organisations to put their future into their hands.
At SAS, we love bold questions, outrageous and impossible questions. The answers are waiting to be discovered because space isn't the new frontier. Data is. And with the right questions and the right analytics, we make data do amazing things. Like make the world safer, faster, healthier, and kinder. All we have to do is ask the data, analyze it, shape it, and make it work smarter for everyone, everywhere. With SAS, you can turn data into answers and ask the questions that move the world forward. SAS, curiosity forever.
AI in the enterprise is all the rage. But put the hype aside. How are today's organizations actually executing and seeing value from enterprise AI? Dataiku is the platform, democratizing access to data and enabling companies to build their own path to enterprise AI. To make enterprise AI a reality, Dataiku provides one simple user interface for data preparation, data exploration, automated machine learning, model deployment, AI monitoring, and management. Dataiku is built for everyone with robust features for both the code-free and the code-first. From business users and analysts to data scientists and engineers, Dataiku makes working with data faster and smarter. Each company's path to enterprise AI looks different, so Dataiku supports the creation of a spectrum of applications. Whether that means building out a self-serve analytics platform or fully operationalized AI integrated with business processes. No matter what the underlying changes in architecture or advancements in technology, Dataiku remains at the center, the cornerstone of data governance and responsible AI. Dataiku's centralized, controlled, and elastic environment fuels exponential growth in the amount of data, the number of AI projects, and the number of people contributing to such projects. Dataiku, for every industry, every use case, and also for everyone. Discover your path to enterprise AI at dataiku.com.
People have got a unique thing about them, which is not only are they awesome technically, but they feel a sense of belonging. We genuinely call ourselves a family. Genic was started out of a desire to start something from scratch that tried to tackle the data market with a new and fresh approach.
Our vision is to never settle on a technology, to be constantly chasing the unicorn.
The space is moving really quickly, and we see it as our job to be aware of new things coming, and when they are good things, be able to introduce them to our clients.
Databricks is the data and AI company. We help data teams solve the world's toughest problems. They can't be solved in silos. They can't be solved by one person. We need all the data, all the science, all the brain power in one place on the only open, unified platform for data management, business analytics, and machine learning.
In an uncertain world, understanding data is more important than ever. It can help organizations make informed decisions, face ongoing challenges with confidence, and prepare for an uncertain future. The Centre for Business Analytics works with organizations to unlock the power of data so they can make factual, proactive decisions that deliver competitive advantage. Our educational programs provide powerful learning opportunities for executives looking to transform decision-making through business analytics. We provide access to a premium analytics ecosystem, which includes world-class academics and research experts, along with early access to analytics talent who speak the language of business, technology, and mathematics to drive value and navigate change. Through the power of analytics, we are empowering organizations to put their future into their hands.
At SAS, we love bold questions, outrageous and impossible questions. The answers are waiting to be discovered because space isn't the new frontier. Data is. And with the right questions and the right analytics, we make data do amazing things. Like make the world safer, faster, healthier, and kinder. All we have to do is ask the data, analyze it, shape it, and make it work smarter for everyone, everywhere. With SAS, you can turn data into answers and ask the questions that move the world forward. SAS, curiosity forever.
AI in the enterprise is all the rage. But put the hype aside. How are today's organizations actually executing and seeing value from enterprise AI? Dataiku is the platform, democratizing access to data and enabling companies to build their own path to enterprise AI. To make enterprise AI a reality, Dataiku provides one simple user interface for data preparation, data exploration, automated machine learning, model deployment, AI monitoring, and management. Dataiku is built for everyone with robust features for both the code-free and the code-first. From business users and analysts to data scientists and engineers, Dataiku makes working with data faster and smarter. Each company's path to enterprise AI looks different, so Dataiku supports the creation of a spectrum of applications. Whether that means building out a self-serve analytics platform, or fully operationalized AI integrated with business processes. No matter what the underlying changes in architecture or advancements in technology, Dataiku remains at the center, the cornerstone of data governance and responsible AI. Dataiku's centralized, controlled, and elastic environment fuels exponential growth in the amount of data, the number of AI projects, and the number of people contributing to such projects. Dataiku, for every industry, every use case, and also for everyone. Discover your path to enterprise AI at dataiku.com.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all again at day 3 of the Business Analytics Conference. So we've welcomed Professor Steve Fidelis along with Julie Farago from Verily to talk about some of the fantastic applications of AI within their respective organizations. But for the next 2 sessions, we're going to be thrilled to be talking more about the infrastructure that feeds into the ability to democratize data across the organizations. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Lee Hicken, who's the Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft. Lee has over 27 years of experience in the IT industry across Asia, UK and Australia. He has been a CISSP certified security architect with RSA Security and Tivoli, leading the IoT business development team across APAC and AWS, and most recently now, of course, the CTO for Microsoft. As CTO, Lee helps customers on their journey of digital transformation through cloud technologies, focusing on the adoption of intelligent cloud services such as AI, IoT, machine learning, and cognitive services underpinned by core cloud infrastructure technology strategy. Lee is passionate about the positive potential for artificial intelligence to build an inclusive and bright future. With that, I'll hand over to you, Lee. Looking forward to your session.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate the kind words. So thank you for joining me for this session. Hopefully I'm coming through loud and clear. I'm sure you'll let me know if I'm not. And so I want to spend the next 20 minutes talking about this idea of democratizing AI. And we hear a lot and we talk a lot about democratizing data, but we don't talk about the democratization of the services that will actually make use of that AI. And that's really where I want to focus my time. So I'm going to talk a bit about the how. I'm going to talk about the why. I'm going to look at the what, and then I'm going to look at where the future is going with this. And so let's start with that how. What you're looking at on the screen here, when my slide comes up, is a baby hawksbill turtle. It's an indigenous native turtle to Australia. It's native to the Cape York region peninsula up in far north Queensland, and it's an endangered species. It is an endangered species because its habitat has been invaded by feral pigs. Its population, which is approximately 2,000 births a year, is almost 100% decimated every single year by those feral pigs. The feral pigs have become very smart at understanding how turtles hatch, where they come to off the beaches, and they're doing a better job at understanding the scale of the problem than we do. Of course, the challenge is they're part of that problem. And so what they really need is AI. What they need is some way to optimize the information we already know, whether we know that through science, whether we know that through indigenous land management. We know what the problem is. What we lack is the scale and the tools and the data visibility to actually solve that problem. And so this is an example of how data and AI together get democratized to create a whole different outcome. What you're seeing here is a project we did with the CSIRO and the Indigenous Land Rangers up in Cape York and a number of other organizations whose job is simply to serve to protect these indigenous organisms and these indigenous animals that live within our country. And this is just one of many that they're struggling with to deal with this problem. And the democratization comes from this. It comes from providing them the tools and the insights and the technology that let them do their job better. Democratizing data gives people access to information. Democratizing AI enables people to do what they do far more optimally, far better, and far quicker. And so you'll see when this video plays in a second, you'll get a sense of what that really means. I must remember to unmute myself again. So I'll play the video. And so we moved from a situation where rangers were walking 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers of beaches, taking months to walk the beach just to find a turtle base, a turtle nest or turtle tracks, just to understand where turtles are hatching. And of course, by the time they've identified them, walking the beach, and then they've got to come back and do something about it, it's too late. The nest has been raided, the pigs have been in, and they're done, and they're gone. By replacing that process of mundane data collection, by walking up and down the beaches with drones and with cameras that are capturing the images, creating hundreds and thousands of pictures, classifying and labeling those pictures, and then presenting all of that massive data, which was manually collected, and putting that simply and quickly into the hands of a visualized dashboard that says, here's where the problem is. You know what to do. You're a land ranger. You understand how to control pigs, how to manage nests, how to manage turtles. The AI doesn't do that. The AI helps you get better at doing what you need to do. So when we want to democratize AI, what we're really doing is making sure that AI is working to serve us and sit alongside areas of human ingenuity, human capability, and human skill, and not simply being engineered to try and replace some of those processes along the way. So why? Why is this important? Why is AI any different? What's the sort of the cognitive rush to do this so quickly? Look, there's all sorts of hyperbole about this, and we talk about a seismic shift happening in the industry, and we have done. There's always the year of something that is going on in the IT world. And I've sort of shied away. I don't like this statement that we talk about that, that every company is a software company. I don't think that's true. I think every company is still the company they were before, and with still the same goals, ambitions, and purpose that they served before. But it is true that every company is now built on software. Software drives, operates, runs every single company, large or small. And so by definition, as software becomes the engine of most organizations, and software is increasingly being driven by this everything as a service, we're seeing AI tools, the complex models and algorithms becoming more available. Data is very accessible, scaled out in huge silos of information. It becomes more apparent that AI is what you're going to need to stay relevant, whether that's commercially relevant or socially relevant or economically relevant. AI is now going to be the tool that builds on top of your software innovation. So in order to do that, if AI is important, what you've got to avoid is the silos of data and the silos of AI, which is where we sort of got to in our initial journeys of, kind of the broad explosion of data across many organizations. Because as data became democratized and data was opened up and we all explored open data sharing platforms and open data management and started making data something that the organization, that was the life breath of the organization, the new oil of industry is data. If we do that and forget the fact that data is going to drive an AI outcome, we end up creating a whole new set of problems, which is data in its infinite value ends up in silos. And those silos are segmented off by not technical problems anymore, but they're siloed off because of trust, accessibility, culture, capability, all of the things that, frankly, are what we need to change in order to grow the adoption of AI in a meaningful and positive way. And so AI is different to anything else we've done before. We always talk a lot about these sort of, these industrial revolution changes and how the world is kind of constantly evolving, systems of record and systems of intelligence. When we think a lot about AI isn't about building smarter systems like we used to do with systems of intelligence services and smart sort of ERP control systems. It's about optimizing human systems. We're building AI to do reasoning and decision on our behalf. We're building AI to replicate and emulate human cognitive systems, sight, speech, language, knowledge and interpretation as well. And it's doing data acquisition and data description of its own. It's creating new sets of data out of the data we have. And so we have to kind of fundamentally remember that AI is going to change. The outcomes of AI are unknown to us today. Systems of intelligence are always known to us. Input in, output out. We knew what was going to happen. With AI, we don't. And so we can't have that locked up into small segments of companies, into organizations, or the haves and the have-nots. Data and AI both need to be democratized so that we can all tap into that capability and that tool set. Because it fundamentally is a human opportunity. Philosophically, we all see the opportunity that AI does provide in optimizing human experiences. And I listened to the life science conversation just before this, and I'm sure other sessions around the conference will talk about the fact that when applied correctly, AI allows intelligent humans and smart people who have great skills to optimize that, because it allows them to move past the noise and focus on the real work that needs to be done. And that's absolutely true. We need to think about this human and artificial intelligence together, but every human. And that means thinking about how does AI, which is a very complex, deep domain of specialized skills, whether you are a data scientist, whether you understand machine learning models, whether you understand the hardware technology, the FPGAs and the GPUs and the languages and the interconnects between that. If you, somewhere along the line, we have to make sure that everybody understands enough of that to trust it, and then enough of that to work with it and build on it. And that's the purpose and the vision that we work towards as a company, and that's what we seek to achieve in our goals around building AI services and tools. And just to kind of keep a business perspective on that as well, given the audience and the place I'm speaking at, there's a lot to be talked about in terms of why do we do this economically? What does it matter to businesses? There are many different ways of skinning this review, but this is some particular data that we've looked at from the lens of those companies that innovate early, and in this sense, innovation through AI is a particular lens, but those that innovate early, the willingness to take risks, the willingness to explore potential, the willingness to invest up front without necessarily a clear net knowledge or line of sight to the outcome commercially or otherwise, are the ones that have the strongest advantage. And the data definitely points to the fact that there's a connection between your willingness to invest in innovation and share that innovation across your organization, not just at the C-level and not just in pockets of sort of innovation services and parts of the business that are just focused on what's next. Those that share that across the business see a significant improvement in their cash flow in terms of cash return on investment over time. So there's business value in this. It isn't just about the human outcome. It is about a business outcome as well. So what is it? What are the things that we need to do? And frankly, here is where I talk a bit about what we're doing as a company. And I don't want this to be about Microsoft. I want this to be about the tools and processes we're learning from that we're aiming to share with our industry and with our customers and partners, because one of the very core tenets of democratization is to share. And that's what we see as being our purpose here. So what is it? When we think about democratizing AI in the organization, it really falls into these three categories, but we're going to focus on the middle one, empowering people. But that's not to say it is not important to understand that by democratizing it, we make it meaningful. The AI investments you make as your business have to have a meaningful impact to your people, to your customers, to your segment, and to your overall business operations. Testing and trialing AI in small pockets adds no value, and it doesn't kind of drive any meaningful, large-scale democratized outcome. And then responsible AI, taking responsibility for it. And I could talk for another 3 hours entirely on a whole session on the importance of why responsibility is even more important than the technology when we think about approaching AI as a service that organizations adapt. So with this thing about that empowering people as the kind of the core of this, it's about how do we make sure that everybody in the organization has the skills, the capability, the knowledge and understanding to adopt not just the data services, but the AI that sits on top of that. And so we think about this idea of the AI-powered organization. How do we put AI into action for your organization? And we think about AI for all employees, so not just technology, not just the business, not just innovation. How do you get your people AI ready? How do you think about that from a cultural point of view? And then how do you bring it all together to create purpose and mission? And this is, I think if I tell this from a Microsoft story lens perspective here, just quickly, this was that change of leadership we saw in Satya that took what was already in our people and our organization. We already had great skilled people and we had a strong culture. But by bringing it all together as a leadership, by taking control at the front of the ship and driving everybody to a point of view that matters not just to the business, but matters to individuals, is one of the key things that I think about when I talk to customers about their vision and drive for AI, is I ask, well, what is leadership's view? How are leadership driving this? What are they doing to ensure that this is something that matters to everybody in the company? So that's the kind of the core tenets. We see pockets of this in many organizations. We see this centralized AI. So the company says, absolutely fantastic. We need to be an AI-driven org. Let's go build an AI-centric organization in the corner, and they go build that. Doesn't scale. They decentralize it. Everybody go free and figure out what you can do in your business. And we have these pockets of innovation, but there's no central control. That AI-powered model, by having strong leadership, skills, and a purpose, creates this idea of a centralized set of principles, but a broad across the business capability to execute on those principles. And so it has to be about building tools that everybody can use, that every part of the business can tap into. And this is kind of where we think about this from a product perspective. What are we building at Microsoft? We build AI into everything. So when you touch and use Microsoft 365, Outlook and Office and PowerPoint and Dynamics, and you have our tools like Power BI and Power Apps that help you quickly build these things. They're built for business users. They're not complex technical tools, but they unlock complex concepts like AI labeling of images for a recognition tool to count stock in your store. So everything in that stack is available to the business. But then also we've got those developers and the technologists who want to build on your terms with whatever language, toolset, capability you want to own and build, and you want to put a complete control frame around that service because it's unique to your business, or perhaps you're in an industry that needs to think about this from a controlled, whether you're in healthcare dealing with, mission critical PII and information that has value outside of your organization, you want to take some stronger responsibility for that. And there we think about building that complete stack. And I guess I use this slide to demonstrate A, that we have that stack, but B, never underestimate the complexity of what's involved in building an AI solution. We sort of make it look very simple with this democratization view, but I don't want to draw away from the fact that there's a lot of deep, complex hardware, application layers, tool sets, frameworks, concepts around the concept about creation and management of code, and then simply the actual models themselves. It is not a simple thing, and the democratization effort is really important to make sure that this doesn't stay deeply complex in this domain of machine learning. And so that comes out to be a set of tools that flow across any organization. And the key thing you'll see there is this common data platform. I don't want to dismiss the fact that even though we're talking about democratizing AI, it's democratizing of the data platform too, that we need to think about. And that comes with this idea as well that, DevOps is a great framework for optimizing the process because it creates this flow, this cohesion, this collaborative effort. We can do the same thing with AI, and MLOps is a model framework to think about how does AI get scaled and optimized across a pipeline, across the business to create the connection, but also to remove risk and remove failure by automation of processes along that way. So there's a lot to think about that in terms of where we are today. But I guess what's also interesting to think about, and I'll move on to this, is where we're going to next. So I just want to give you also a couple of links here. You can see at the bottom there, aka.ms/AIBS and RAI resources. These are some tools you can go and take away today to kind of learn about what's the business impact of AI and what are the things you need to think about as you democratize that access to AI in your business. But as we think about where we're going to next, where does the industry go to next? If my slide will come up for me. Yes, it will. There's two kind of broad concepts I want to leave with you with, and I'll leave Q&A. The first is we've got to think about this at scale. So today we have lots of great capabilities in AI, and they are scalable in some ways, but what we're seeing is this connection between large-scale models needs large-scale compute, and we need to link the two together. And so one of the things that Microsoft's very focused on is building out these massive models. It's hard for you to see on the screen here, but only 2 years ago, we're talking about models with, say, 90 million parameters in them, to where we are today now, 2 years later, talking about models with 17 billion parameters and growing beyond that, parameters being essentially the labeled data points within a data set that we use to teach a system. So the scaling is going off the chart. And so with that, we need this supercomputer that we're building in the cloud to make available to our customers to democratize access to the scale now, not just the service, but the scale as well. We build it into our products, and we take that, we build it into the services that you can consume as customers as. And then the last thing I want to talk about is how we get to the edge. So again, we need to rethink about how AI is this centralized service in the cloud or centralized in data halls and data warehouses. As we've seen this automation of our systems to the edge, we've gone from these automated systems driven by software, as I said earlier, to these autonomous systems at the edge powered by AI. And where that's going to now is this new concept. We've had machine learning, but now we're talking about machine teaching, an evolution of where supervised and unsupervised learning and reinforcement learning to machine teaching, where we teach machines in the same way that we teach children at school, around moving through this ideas of a curriculum-based transfer learning. I teach you, you see it, and we learn together. And we've got a whole bunch of tools that can show you and demonstrate that, but it's about democratizing that. I'm conscious that's the end of my session, so I'm going to put my last slide up because I love the quote. And I'll leave it open for some questions because I feel like we've got a few coming through. Anita, are you there? I'm back to, I'll let the quote stand by its own and we'll open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Lee. I am right here waiting for you. I was switching over to our Q&A. We do have quite a few that have come in for you. So that was a really great session. We find that data obviously lives in silos within organizations, and it's great to see what some of the tools at Microsoft can do. One of the questions that's come in from Parneet, who is a BA in the data and analytics space, is about understanding the importance of AI, of course, and the value that it can add to the business model. But ultimately, how can that value be shown to the leadership team to really get their buy-in on the use of AI?
Yeah, look, it's one of those perennial questions we have in the IT world, is how do you make technology sound important and valuable to business? Because, of course, business is more about the economics, the investments, and the return. Technology is always about the innovation, the capability, and what can I do? Look, I can only speak from the experience we've had, is that it is about having a leadership that recognizes that investment drives value. And that slide I drew up earlier on about connecting the tissue between the value of innovation investment today to long-term commercial success is one of the key levers that we talk about. But often, this can also come from some of the other pressures that we see around AI, which is around the ethical, responsible, and the community impact, and thinking about, as a business, what is the story you want to tell about your purpose of the business? And this is often something that leadership does care about, is what does the business represent in the community, in the organization, in the country? And AI can represent a strong story around impact and value, but also a strong potential for risk and damage control, or damage to brand if not done properly.
So as a follow-on question, Lee, to that one, time to value, I think, is a pet project for many in the audience. So in terms of demonstrating ROI and commercial value, part of the frustration, I guess, of many leadership teams is, well, you're asking me to invest money, but I'm not going to see the returns on that maybe till my tenure is done. So from that perspective, what might your recommendations and suggestions be on more shorter term projects that might have more value from an AI perspective for those that are just getting started?
So look, this is certainly not meant to be in any way a product placement conversation, but one of the things that we're investing in to think about this exact problem, because we've had exactly this challenge we have. It's just too hard often. I get what you're saying, but actually to build it is so complex, difficult, and costly, we're never going to get past the first stage. We're building a lot of tools to enable prototyping. So we think a lot about, how do you mock up, how do you do wireframes of AI solutions? Conscious that still needs to tap into real data, and you need to still use the complex models, but building tools like Power Apps and AI Builder, which are sort of bite-sized tools that help you wireframe up an AI solution for business and demonstrate outcome without investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in kind of data frameworks and models and tools and people. In fact, in many ways, one of the great examples we've got is London Heathrow Airport. There was somebody in the business just started using this tool to show the leadership what could be done when you build these things to have better tools. It costs nothing in real terms, but it's about demonstrating that in a simple, easy way. So that's the simplest way I can think of doing that.
Thanks, Lee. One of the other questions, again, it's around, of course, resistance to change. Dean has a question about how to overcome that resistance to change and the adoption to these solutions, especially with a large bureaucratic business. Many of our attendees are joining from large organisations. What might you have to recommend to Dean?
Well, I'm sure there's 100,000 smarter people on the call here that know how to manage business and bureaucracy and kind of impact and change at leadership tables. I will say to you, Dean, that frankly, I don't have a good answer for you other than the only way I've ever seen it successful, the only way I've ever seen this come through and land as a meaningful impact for change in the business is when leadership drive it, not just endorse it, but leadership are out there on the front foot talking about it, encouraging the business to do it, and in creating that empowerment. It's a horrible word, empowerment, but if you don't have a leader that's telling you as an individual somewhere in the company, I want you to question the decisions we make. I want you to ask about this. I want you to learn about this technology because it's important you do. People don't do it. And so you need that leadership push. I don't know how you get that, but that's how it worked for us as an organization.
Thanks, Lee. Another question, Sean, welcome back. From Sean St. Mart over at the NAB, one of our corporate partners. What controls does Microsoft put in place to keep AI in check as you continue to scale it across the business?
No, Sean, sorry, I'm super glad you asked that question because I had to jump over the slide quickly in my deck. We have an entire process. So we have if you look up Microsoft Office of Responsible AI or Microsoft Ether, AETHER, this is our AI and ethics and research framework. I actually sit as the chairman of the Responsible AI Committee for Australia. We have a series of governance. There's a lot of depth in it, and you'll see it in those resources I shared, aka.ms/AIBS, terrible acronym, or the resources one. We basically build tools and governance. We have process, we have checks and balances, we have diverse groups of people that question the decisions we make, the products we build, and that leads us to build guidelines. It leads us to build logic that says we will or will not do this, and ultimately creates the online service terms that define how our products are used and sold. So it's a very complex thing that I could have talked for another hour on. And I'm happy, Sean, if you want to connect separately, I'm happy to share some of that detail with you.
Thanks, Lee. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. In terms, you mentioned obviously democratization of data.
Yes.
Within your organisation, you talked about the silos that each organisation has, but obviously as a centre, we very much like to purport our mission to be combining data sets and what insights you might be able to find from combined data sets. How do you encourage organisations to share in between each other such that you can generate much more insight?
Look, it's a balance of risk management and value return on that sharing point. So technically, we obviously talk about the ability to put security frameworks, zero trust security models, APIs and controls to make sure your data is still controlled and safe. But the other thing we really focus on is a concept called data sheets for data sets. So as we become more open with our data sets, and I highlight this point, we're all sharing data, we've all got massive amounts of data. If we don't describe what that data actually is, and that doesn't mean it's this data set in this format with this data type, we describe what was the socioeconomic state at the time of the world, who was the data set captured from, by which part of segment of society were used to associate this, what was happening at the time that might have impacted the way that data was gathered. That data set, that data sheet helps long-term define how that data set should and could be applied when integrated with other data sets to create AI-driven outcomes.
So as a follow-up to that, one of the things as a centre that we always like to follow up is the lineage of the data, obviously. So whilst it's efficient to share a dashboard for the senior leadership team for them to look at, if they don't know where that data came from, how can they make sure that they can rely on that data for very sort of senior level important decisions?
Yep. No, look, it's lineage is a great way to think about it, and that's exactly what we mean. I mean, inside of Microsoft, we are not allowed to create a data set of any kind today without a data sheet that describes what that data set actually is and the purpose and everything else. And then we're also building a couple of tools that are out there in GitHub. They're open source framework tools to be used by anyone. So things like FairLearn and Interpret ML. So Interpret ML is more about the modeling. FairLearn is more about the data. So FairLearn, it sits between your model and your data as you execute, as you're training, and it learns what your data set is teaching your model to do. So it learns that your data, as data drift occurs or as your data set has a proclivity towards a particular outcome in terms of weighting for the data, it learns that and it alerts you to the fact that your data, whilst maybe a great example of, say, social data for monitoring mortgage applications, actually is starting to sway very heavily to white middle-aged males in their 40s because that's just what the data is telling it. It's not the model's fault, it's not the data's fault, but the combination of the two will point that out.
It's never one thing in isolation, obviously.
No.
And I guess the final question for you, a topic near and dear to our hearts here at Melbourne Business School, is around shortage of talent. It comes in from Samir in our audience, and he's asking about how Microsoft is addressing the AI talent shortage, and in what areas are you able to assist customers on that front?
Look, I'm conscious of time, so there's a lot we're trying to do, Samir, and of course, I'm not going to proclaim that we've got it solved. We work closely with, say, Tate New South Wales to build training skills into some of their Cert 4 compute courses and include more about just the AI, but also some of the ethics and principles of AI. We have all the courses I shared earlier, the AI Business School, the AI Ethics, and the AI resources that are there for you to tap into and use. And we do have a set of programmatic services we give to our customers. And I say give, these are free. We have something called our Enterprise Skilling Initiative, which is accessible free for any customer that is about learning how to use this technology. So whether that be AI data services, Azure data services, Azure AI services, or just Azure fundamentals, it's a start. And what I would say, Samir, is this is something we want to do for our sphere of the world and share as much as we can, but it needs to happen more broadly across the entire segment. It's not something one vendor, one government, or one community, or one research institute is ever going to deliver.
Fabulously. I think we've come to time for the end of your session. You covered a fabulous amount of detail there. We really appreciate you joining us today at our conference.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
So on our day focused on machine learning, AI, and technology, it's my great pleasure to introduce IBM next up on infusing analytics and AI across your business. So first up, we'll have a conversation between Eyal Steinberg, who is the Vice President of Global Sales at IBM's Data, AI, and Automation Business Unit, which is about 2,500 people in the US, in conversation with their Chief AI Officer of IBM in discussion of how they've used AI within their own organization to truly increase productivity, efficiency, and that ability to, of course, scale up and self-service. After Seth and Eyal finish with their conversation, we'll have Ross Farrelly join us after that conversation to answer any questions that you might have after the session. So Ross will join us afterwards, but please, as you listen to their conversation, put in questions into the Q&A chat box, and we'll make sure to address them with Ross following Seth and Eyal's discussion.
Hello, my name is Eyal Steinberg, and I'm the Vice President of Data, AI, and Automation at IBM. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about a topic that is very near and dear to my own heart: infusing analytics and AI into your business. Let's get started. First, you don't need someone like me to tell you that 2021 is turning out to be a year unlike any year we've seen in the recent past. 3 statistics that I think do a great job of setting the stage. First, it's expected nearly 50% of the workforce will not return full-time to the workspace. 50%. Second, 1 out of 5 Fortune 500 companies may not survive 2021. The idea of just sitting on the sidelines, weathering the storm, hibernating is no longer a viable strategy. And third, roughly a third of the CFOs we talk to are increasing their investment in automation and AI type tools to increase the speed and forecast accuracy of the decisions they're making post-pandemic. No surprise. A lot of companies have reduced expense in the last year, and now that things are starting to get back to normal in parts of the world, it's the idea of how do you do more of the same with less. And by introducing more innovation through AI and automation type tools, you get that operating leverage. Let's talk a little about innovation. Innovation is a funny concept in that I've yet to meet a company that doesn't strive to be an innovative company. And when you break it down a little bit, you find that 3 elements or attributes of those companies exist. The first, for an innovative company, this idea of intelligence on how they operate. I know personally that I am constantly looking at every single aspect of my business. And there are functions that I've produced or I've performed for the last 10 years. Intelligent and innovative companies are looking at those functions and questioning, do they need to exist? And if so, do they need to exist the way that they operated in the past? Really questioning all parts of their business. The second is there's a sense of resiliency that tomorrow's going to be better than today. And we are going to make it through this part of the storm, or we're going to weather this part of the storm. That is the resiliency you need to be able to make the bet that even though today might be inconvenient for me to make this expense or this timing or prioritize this, the promise of tomorrow is worth it. And third, this idea of flexibility. Flexible in to question your current operations and to change. And secondly, to know that it's not going to be perfect in every time. The first time you do anything, there is going to be risk and there is going to be challenge, but innovative companies are willing to be flexible enough to know that they're going to fail in certain areas, but it's worth it for the long term. When you take all of that innovation into context for 2020, 2020 has proven that AI isn't just a priority or nice to have. It's now become a mandatory to differentiate each individual businesses to leapfrog the competition. And when you look at the skills required, what's great to see is that AI, data science are now top focus areas for many companies. A lot of times we talk to companies, it's 2 of the top 3 initiatives and focus areas revolve around infusing analytics and data science into their operations. Even on a personal perspective, AI has accelerated drastically in the last few years. I know for me personally, I have a device in my kitchen that will help me with recipe management and scheduling, and it will help me play music, all understanding natural language processing. I personally drive an autonomous car, which I get a lot of pleasure out of, and I'm blown away when I think about all the capabilities within my vehicle. In the business world, it's even more complex. A lot of businesses have been operating for many, many years. Within that operation, as the companies have grown, there has been policy and process and a gearbox that has been developed. Infusing analytics and AI into that gearbox is not so simple. Within IBM, we simplify our software offerings in that there's 4 key areas in how we work with our customers. There are the things that we do that automate at scale. And this could be business automation. How do you up leverage or how do you upskill your employee count, your employees, so that they're not spending as much time on manual efforts that can be automated through software. The second is around application automation. As the world goes digital and it goes from customer to customer, from person to machine, how do you automate those interactions? Securing anything. Security is defining your perimeter, understanding if there's been a breach, being able to remedy the breach before the bad guy gets away with too much. Right? Then there's modernization. Modernization can be as simple as taking a monolithic deployment and adding microservices and deploying that application or the technology from on-premise to the cloud, to multiple clouds, to hybrid cloud of both cloud and on-premise, being able to containerize the offerings through a Kubernetes type solution like Red Hat OpenShift, and providing a more modern infrastructure and approach to core applications. And finally, predicting outcomes. This could be anything from consolidation of data environments to being able to make better financial planning or general risk GRC type decisions in your everyday workflow. The key here is that across these disciplines, AI is absolutely infused into every single part. You'll notice there isn't a 5th box for AI off to the left. AI is fundamental to every one of these domain areas, because as you're thinking about threshold tolerance within your automation management, or if you're thinking about predicting better outcomes, there's a place for AI across the entire continuum. One of the things that I'm most proud of IBM is not only our people, but also our customers. We work with some great customers across all 4 of these domain areas, some of which are featured here. If you take an example of automation, a company like CaixaBank, it's a multinational bank in Spain where they deal with many, many different languages. They have over 1 million different contacts into their contact center on a monthly basis, over 1 million. One approach is to put a human to a human for every one of those interactions, but that comes with a pretty high cost. They've brought in an IBM product, a virtual assistant called Watson Assistant, to be able to deflect 60, 70, 80, sometimes 90% of those contacts in, to be able to deal with it through the virtual assistant, drastically reducing costs, but also increasing the customer experience by getting a quicker response time for their inquiry. Another example is TalkTalk. TalkTalk, like many other companies, has grown through acquisition. They had 8 different silos, all from their legacy companies, that they had to manage when there was a security breach. By putting it under one specific security application, an IBM security application, they're able to identify and to remediate any security breaches much, much faster. The list goes on and on. We're really proud of our customers, and they span across every single industry. If it's a automotive doing preventive maintenance, to a media company looking at how they increase their redemption of their advertisement, to sporting events like Wimbledon, where it's understanding security, but also understanding sizzle reels. And if there was audience reaction to an event, indicating what should that be, that clip that you see when you break to commercial. We are really proud of our customers, and you'll notice across every one of these functions, AI is absolutely infused into the key decision-making process. One customer in Australia that I want to feature is Air Services Australia. Air Services Australia, and specifically the firefighting unit within the agency, is a IBM customer that they deal with roughly 26 different major airports within Australia. They have over 6,700 incidents per year that they're dealing with. Historically, they had distributed or different data environments that each one of the different incidents would kind of fall under. Different teams were managing the different data environments, and it took a long time after an incident to be able to consolidate the information. Sometimes weeks, sometimes days, but it took a long time, and it came at a high cost. Moving to an IBM single solution, they were able to consolidate that data and add more planning analytics and business intelligence on top of it to increase the speed at which they were able to get insights out of that data after an incident. Also, by doing this in a more effective, centralized manner, they were able to reduce the number of people that it took to produce those results. A great, great example. When we work across all these customers, we see a common trend that I want to share with you. At first, the journey to AI starts with someone saying that this is important to the company. It could be a board of director person, it could be a CXO, but they say we are going to infuse data and AI into our operations. And typically what happens is they'll assemble a small team of data scientists and give them the keys to the kingdom that they have the data across all the environment to start pulling up insights. What we find is when you fast forward a period of time, there's limited deployments of actual models in production. That's one finding. We'll talk about that in a bit. The second thing is what we're finding as a reality in the last few years, graduates from university, let's say in the last 5 to 10 years, have come out with skills around Python and R that have typically been associated with that small group of data scientists. And these employees are not working just in the data science group, but they're nurses and they're frontline workers in retail or hospitality, or they're working in the warehouses. And as they're approaching their jobs, they're the closest to the actual business making decision process, how they're functioning, line of business. They have a certain appetite for these data science tools. The challenge is that they typically don't have access to that data. And what's happening is this black market or a unregulated, ungoverned market of data is now being created, where data is being emailed around or shared around through shared files, creating major exposure for companies. And companies are left with one of two decisions. Either one, you lock down the data and give it to a handful of people, like the data scientists, or two, you open it up and give tools to the broader masses. And what we're finding is best practices is making AI accessible throughout the organization, but governing it, not restricting it, to be able to get the ultimate leverage. Let me give you an example. I'm proud to say that at IBM, not only are we a provider of these tools, but we are also a major consumer. IBM, you might think of us as the software company or a services company, but we are a pretty complex company in our own. We have multiple hundreds of thousands of employees, and we have financial departments, and we have development departments, and we have sales and marketing departments, which I represent for data, AI, and automation. What I'm proud of as a line of business owner is that we are using our own AI and analytics when we go to market. When I look at pipeline management or which customers have an opportunity to have a better experience. What I'm going to do is, instead of talking about it, I'm going to invite my partner in crime, Seth Dobrin, who is our Chief Data Officer, onto this call to talk a little about some of the experiences that we've had. Hey Seth, how are you?
I'm doing well, Al. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Welcome to this session. I'm going to ask you a few questions. I'm sure our attendees would love to hear from you. First, let's get started. Tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Seth Dobrin. I am the Chief AI Officer for IBM. which means I'm responsible for a few things. One is our overall AI strategy as a company and execution against it, as well as the relevant part to this conversation, our internal transformation leveraging data and AI. And I've been with IBM a little over 4 years. I joined from one of our customers where I led their data and AI part of the digital transformation there.
Great. Well, I could say working pretty closely with you. I'm glad you're here. You're making a big difference. So when you're thinking about transforming IBM, which I think you're doing, how do you prioritize which areas to start with?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. So one is when you first get started, it's really important to just get started. So identify someone that's passionate, in this case, you, about leveraging data and AI to make their lives and their business better. But at the same time, there's design thinking methodologies that really help extract and build what I call a decision portfolio. So what are the decisions you need to drive as a company leveraging data and AI? And we have a whole enterprise AI session that was developed in my team and with our design team that helps extract this information and kind of gives you a list of what are the decisions. And then that's a strategic workshop. Then you go down and you do what we call a technical workshop. And this is where you start understanding what is the data you need to drive those decisions, what's the maturity of that data, is it available, kind of what's the quality of it, really line it up to, is the data collected, is it organized, is it analyzed, and is it ready to be infused into your business processes, your software, or your workflows. And each one of these is about 2 days. And we've gone through, as you know, a couple of these with our teams, specifically around how do we better close our months and our quarters as a business so that we understand going into a month end or quarter end how we're operating, what are specific things we can do to make it, move the needle the way we need to move it, which is obviously generate more revenue.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we're aligned on the end outcome. And you're right. Thank you for saying about the passionate. It's really a team sport, and I think you're a great partner on this. When you're looking at all the things we do, kind of the journey to AI, the AI ladder, you talked about a little about the rungs. What do you see as the biggest obstacles that you could imagine other companies who are going through the same journey are going to have to overcome? And what's your advice for people who are dealing with it to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so there's three things that are really make up the biggest challenge. So one is access to the right talent and retaining the right talent. So that's number one. Number two is understanding how you're going to implement it. So the cultural shift, and then connecting those outcomes to the talent. So the talent understands how they're contributing to those outcomes. And so they're very interconnected. I think that the talent is a challenge, but I don't think it's insurmountable. And again, getting the talent is related to having a strategy. So the best data professionals and data scientists are going to come to a company and be excited about coming to a company if they know how they're going to contribute to that company's objectives, right? So having this decision portfolio that I talk about is important actually in attracting the best talent, because when you're talking to people, you can say, okay, here are the projects you get to work on. Here's how it will contribute to the top and the bottom line of the company. And we're going to use this to measure your success, right? Revenue increase, cost savings, things like that. That's how we're going to measure your success in dollars and cents, so you know how you're creating that value. And that helps with retention as well. That decision portfolio also helps with the cultural change, because you use that portfolio as a set of KPIs. And you can now say, we are in fact saving money by doing these things. And it could be not a whole lot of money. So for instance, the dashboards and insights we're building to run our business better, we're saving, the end of quarter close and month close, we're saving 7 people, 5 or 10 days of work at the end of every quarter per business unit, right? That's not a tremendous amount of money, but that's still cost savings we can point to and go, okay, Carlos, who was our former CFO, Carlos, look how much money, and CFOs love it when we save money, right? Look how much money and time we're actually saving your team by having this dashboard and having these capabilities and these insights built in And that drives cultural change because just like businesses who leverage data and AI are more successful than those that don't, parts of businesses that leverage data and AI are more successful than those that don't. And so you start building that cultural change by, I want to be, in this case, like IL.
Great. Yeah, Seth, it's right on. As much as CFOs love saving money, they love kind of growing the top line as well. So I think it's the combination of both, but I think we all have a role to play. We could easily go much longer. Unfortunately, we're a little limited on time or constrained on time here. So give us one last thought. For all the other people and other companies who are doing the work that you're doing, what's one piece of advice or one parting thought that you would leave with everybody?
Yeah, so I alluded to the AI ladder, right? In order to do this, you need to have data, you need to collect it, you need to organize it, so it needs to be governed and available. You need to analyze it, so you need to start being able to build views of the data, building models off of that data, and then infusing it into workflows, applications, basically putting it in front of people. If you try and do each of those individually, that's a 18 to 24-month process at best. Whereas if you take these decisions that are important to you, that help accelerate your business, and you build out each rung of that ladder, if you will, across those decisions, you start getting value very, very quickly. And we've done it with customers in as quick as 6 weeks, where we did a project with them and they were delivering it as a product to their customers in 6 weeks. So that's as quick as you can do it. But you should start seeing value that quickly of some sort.
Great. Well, Seth, too, thank you. Thank you first for joining me today, and thank you for the broader work that you're doing. It's really making a big difference. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, and always great working with you, IL.
When it comes to AI, similar to what Seth was talking about, the most challenging part is differentiating between good AI and bad AI. And keep in mind, IBM, if you think back to the famous event when Watson joined Jeopardy, that was about 10 years ago. We've been in this business for a while. And when we think about AI, it really falls around 3 different characteristics that are very difficult to ascertain or to measure unless you really get into it. The first is a requirement around language. I talked about CaixaBank and the idea of understanding different languages that exist throughout the world. That's one part. The second is understanding dialect and context and being able, as you get into natural language processing and interactions with people in a language that's not meant for a computer, how do you understand all the specific nuance of language? The second is trust. Trust is a big, big area of focus. I think the starting point of trust, which is not a new term, is this idea of garbage in and garbage out. Trust is about understanding the source data, that it's not been manipulated, is it true to your transactional systems, and understanding exactly the origin or lineage back from your model to your source data. But the second piece is understanding bias, conscious bias, unconscious bias, and drift over time. We're working with a retailer in the United States who in 2020, as the social unrest was happening throughout the world, specifically in the United States, they were questioning how they were doing staff management and hourly management. If you think about an hourly worker, the idea of what shift you have and how many hours is critical and really important to you as your way of making an income. What they did is they questioned not only the models that were used to determine the employee scheduling, but they were looking to see if there was bias within, and then how that model would drift over time, and was there inherent bias in it. A great deployment of a IBM product called IBM OpenScale. And then automation. We talked before around the movement to digitalization and more digital interactions. Being able to take AI and to really scale it out, both in terms of being able to manage it across multiple levels of the organization, but also multiple interactions that happen with employees and customers and machines throughout the operating cycle. When we think about the journey to AI and we think about trust, we have a joke within IBM that says you can't have AI without IA, or information architecture. I don't know if it's a joke as much as a saying. And what we mean by IA, like Seth was talking before, around this journey to AI and this AI ladder. And what that means is you start with collecting your data, your base layer, collecting your data. And that could be structured, unstructured data, that could be on-premise, that could be on the cloud. Once you have it collected, then it's organizing your data, which is everything from data governance to ETL, to everything you need to do to put your data in a form that it could be analyzed. which gets us to our third rung, which is analyzing your data. That's everything from data science tools to auto AI, which is auto selection of the right algorithm, to understanding bias and drift. And then on top, it's infusing analytics or infusing your AI into your operations. That could be a virtual assistant or a business intelligence tool, or it could be understanding financial planning or GRC. But how do you take the AI and actually infuse it into your operations? And that's what we view as IA. One of the things that really I'm proud of in our investment in IBM is how far we've come in the area of AI. I talked about Jeopardy, and that started the Watson journey over the last few years. In the last 2 years alone, we went from bottom left in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for data science and machine learning to last year being a challenger to recently the 2021 Magic Quadrant came out, and IBM, I'm really proud to report, has now taken the pole position in the top right corner of our data science machine learning. This is a testament to how hard we've been working in this space and the innovation and the recognition of how differentiated the IBM products are, and something that I really invite you to participate in. My final slide. First, thank you. I want to make sure that I emphasize the key point. While I talked about risk and compliance, IT operation, financial operations, business operation, customer service, these are all important. And as much as we really value the IBM's own contribution, ultimately we measure success by the success of our customers. And what we're really proud of is when a customer will stand up and talk about their deflection of customer call and then the improvement in the durations, or the increase in employee productivity, or the reduction in financial crimes. These are all ultimately the true indication of our success, the business outcomes that our customers get on their journey to AI. So thank you so much for the time today. I hope no matter where you are in your own personal journey to AI, this was of some value. I look forward to hearing from you and to continuing your own personal journey to AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Eyal and Steph. So next up, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ross Farrelly. He is the segment leader of data science and AI for IBM in Australia and New Zealand. He works with companies throughout the region to develop and execute on their strategies to adopt and realize the benefits of predictive analytics and AI. Ross has extensive consulting experience in large-scale big data implementations in multiple companies across telco, banking and government verticals in Australia, New Zealand and Southeast Asia. He has a Master of Applied Statistics, a Master of Applied Ethics, a first-class honours degree in pure mathematics and a PhD in information systems. Sounds like he's very well equipped to answer your questions, so please continue to put in your questions into the Q&A box as we go along. So we do actually have a few questions already in our queue for Ross. So the very first one that we have for you, Ross, is what is the biggest challenge that you've seen organisations face in terms of infusing AI across the organisation, and how would you suggest overcoming it?
Sure, thank you. Look, I think one of the biggest challenges we see is actually getting the end users to adopt the AI systems once they've been developed. And a lot of that is to do with trusting the recommendations or the predictions that are being made by the systems. So it's important for companies when they're developing AI solutions to engage those end users right from the beginning of the design process, and to really explain how the systems are making decisions and recommendations and build that trust to ensure that adoption is actually taking place.
That's great, Ross. I think Lisa Ronson had talked a bit about that in her session with Coles yesterday when she was, shifting around some of their models when the pandemic hit, and really making sure she asked all the operations people for their input in terms of what they were building. So can I ask you, how does a company identify low-hanging fruit where AI can be applied to good effect?
Sure. So the recommended approach that we take, generally speaking, is to, for an organisation, when we start working with them, we really look at what processes they have in place and also what key decisions are at the heart of their business model. And those decisions are oftentimes a good place where you can actually start applying some artificial intelligence. And it's important, of course, to build the business case right from the beginning. So we will work with the organisation to say, look, what are the key decisions you make? And how much does it cost you, one, to make that decision? But secondly, how much does it cost you if you make a suboptimal decision? And that really gives you an idea of what the size of the prize might be. The next question to ask is, well, is there data available that can help you make that decision better? And then we start saying, well, what out of those different decisions that are made within the organisation, where's the appetite lie to actually start automating? And oftentimes what we'll talk about is not so much artificial intelligence, but what we call augmented intelligence. So this is saying we're going to use the corporate knowledge and the intelligence you have within your workforce, but we're going to augment it by giving your data a voice and giving some machine learning and some artificial intelligence a seat at the table, so you can make better, more informed and more accurate decisions. And oftentimes, once we've done that, we find that the business case stacks up fairly well, and often you'll find some very low-hanging fruit where there's key decisions that are often being made with very little automation or reference to data.
So you've obviously got a lot of experience in implementing AI across various organisations. Are there any particular industries that you've found best utilising predictive workflows?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, what I find is it doesn't matter where I am, whether it's at a barbecue on the weekend or in a business setting. Almost any person I'm speaking to from whatever industry, once we get onto the subject of AI, you know, the feedback I get is, I know we should be doing more of AI. You know, what are other organisations in our industry doing, and so on. But one example I'll give you, for example, is around automating workflows. So we recently engaged with a customer around the whole space of roadside assistance, for example. It's very manual at the moment, and it's ripe for applications of AI. So basically, when a person requests roadside assistance, there's some very basic questions that have to be asked. Where are you? Do you need a tow or do you need a technician? If you need a technician, or petrol or something else. Now, a lot of that decision making and that Q&A can be automated, and it's a lot quicker, and it's actually a lot less stressful for the user to be able to answer that in a virtual setting rather than have to try and get onto a call centre and get that answered. But then we take that further and we say, well, if a tow is required, how do we automatically connect to the relevant towing authorities? But also, how can we then use that data to help the towing companies optimise where they should locate the right type of tow trucks and then optimise the route to the breakdown? So there's a huge amount of opportunity there. And that's just one example. Obviously, that's in the insurance/roadside assistance industry. But that's a good example, actually, of a very manual workflow that benefits greatly from the automation and the infusion of AI.
A lot of great personalisation there as well of what those users who are stuck on the road might need. You know, we're running really short on time, but some of the questions that have come through are around resources. So we have obviously the resources panel in our audience webinar view, but are there any other resources that you can point people to in terms of AI and automation that you think would be useful?
For sure. So probably the one-stop shop for all things AI from IBM is our global event coming up on the 12th of May. It's known as Think. If you just Google Think ANZ, you'll find that 12th of May. I really encourage people to attend. They'll find there'll be presentations, there'll be demonstrations of all our latest, not just AI technology, but security, as well as the information architecture offerings. So that Think conference is a great way that if people would like to learn more. Obviously, I can be their local point of contact, so I'd love it if people could ping me on LinkedIn, and start that conversation. We also have a vast ecosystem of partners throughout Australia and New Zealand who are extremely highly trained and experienced around implementing the IBM AI technologies. So those service partners, they're, as I said, right across Australia and New Zealand, and I can make introductions to any of those business partners if customers are interested in pursuing that avenue.
Great. Thank you for making yourself available to our audience, Ross. We really appreciate that. And, you know, I think that was a really valuable session, again, on the power of technology and what it can do for organizations. So if you're looking for a place to start, you know, reach out to Ross and the crew at IBM. They'd be happy to help. So with that, we're heading into a small break again. Thank you, Ross. And we'll all be back here at 12:30 to welcome Glenda Crisp, the Chief Data Officer at the NAB, to share the next session with you. See you soon.
In an uncertain world, understanding data is more important than ever. It can help organisations make informed decisions, face ongoing challenges with confidence, and prepare for an uncertain future. The Centre for Business Analytics works with organisations to unlock the power of data so they can make factual, proactive decisions that deliver competitive advantage. Our educational programs provide powerful learning opportunities for executives looking to transform decision-making through business analytics. We provide access to a premium analytics ecosystem, which includes world-class academics and research experts, along with early access to analytics talent who speak the language of business, technology, and mathematics to drive value and navigate change. Through the power of analytics, we are empowering organisations to put their future into their hands.
At SAS, we love bold questions, outrageous and impossible questions. The answers are waiting to be discovered because space isn't the new frontier. Data is. And with the right questions and the right analytics, we make data do amazing things. Like make the world safer, faster, healthier, and kinder. All we have to do is ask the data, analyze it, shape it, and make it work smarter for everyone, everywhere. With SAS, you can turn data into answers and ask the questions that move the world forward. SAS, curiosity forever.
AI in the enterprise is all the rage. But put the hype aside. How are today's organizations actually executing and seeing value from enterprise AI? Dataiku is the platform, democratizing access to data and enabling companies to build their own path to enterprise AI. To make enterprise AI a reality, Dataiku provides one simple user interface for data preparation, data exploration, automated machine learning, model deployment, AI monitoring, and management. Dataiku is built for everyone with robust features for both the code-free and the code-first. From business users and analysts to data scientists and engineers, Dataiku makes working with data faster and smarter. Each company's path to enterprise AI looks different, so Dataiku supports the creation of a spectrum of applications. Whether that means building out a self-serve analytics platform or fully operationalized AI integrated with business processes. No matter what the underlying changes in architecture or advancements in technology, Dataiku remains at the center, the cornerstone of data governance and responsible AI. Dataiku's centralized, controlled, and elastic environment fuels exponential growth in the amount of data, the number of AI projects, and the number of people contributing to such projects. Dataiku, for every industry, every use case, and also for everyone. Discover your path to enterprise AI at dataiku.com.
got a unique thing about them, which is not only are they awesome technically, but they feel a sense of belonging. We genuinely call ourselves a family. Genic was started out of a desire to start something from scratch that tried to tackle the data market with a new and fresh approach.
Our vision is to never settle on a technology, to be constantly chasing the unicorn.
The space is moving really quickly, and we see it as our job to be aware of new things coming, and when they are good things, be able to introduce them to our clients.
Databricks is the data and AI company. We help data teams solve the world's toughest problems. They can't be solved in silos. They can't be solved by one person. We need all the data, all the science, all the brain power in one place on the only open, unified platform for data management, business analytics, and machine learning.
In an uncertain world, understanding data is more important than ever. It can help organizations make informed decisions, face ongoing challenges with confidence, and prepare for an uncertain future. The Centre for Business Analytics works with organizations to unlock the power of data so they can make factual, proactive decisions that deliver competitive advantage. Our educational programs provide powerful learning opportunities for executives looking to transform decision-making through business analytics. We provide access to a premium analytics ecosystem, which includes world-class academics and research experts, along with early access to analytics talent who speak the language of business, technology, and mathematics to drive value and navigate change. Through the power of analytics, we are empowering organizations to put their future into their hands.
At SAS, we love bold questions, outrageous and impossible questions. The answers are waiting to be discovered because space isn't the new frontier. Data is. And with the right questions and the right analytics, we make data do amazing things, like make the world safer, faster, healthier, and kinder. All we have to do is ask the data, analyze it, shape it, and make it work smarter for everyone, everywhere. With SAS, you can turn data into answers and ask the questions that move the world forward. SAS, curiosity forever.
AI in the enterprise is all the rage. But put the hype aside. How are today's organizations actually executing and seeing value from enterprise AI? Dataiku is the platform, democratizing access to data and enabling companies to build their own path to enterprise AI. To make enterprise AI a reality, Dataiku provides one simple user interface for data preparation, data exploration, automated machine learning, model deployment, AI monitoring, and management. Dataiku is built for everyone with robust features for both the code-free and the code-first. From business users and analysts to data scientists and engineers, Dataiku makes working with data faster and smarter. Each company's path to enterprise AI looks different, so Dataiku supports the creation of a spectrum of applications. Whether that means building out a self-serve analytics platform or fully operationalized AI integrated with business processes. No matter what the underlying changes in architecture or advancements in technology, Dataiku remains at the center, the cornerstone of data governance and responsible AI. Dataiku's centralized, controlled, and elastic environment fuels exponential growth in the amount of data, the number of AI projects, and the number of people contributing to such projects. Dataiku, for every industry, every use case, and also for everyone. Discover your path to enterprise AI at dataiku.com.
Welcome back, everybody. So continuing our theme for today, which is technology, machine learning, and AI, a reminder for those of you in the audience that SAS has been a pioneer of the analytics segment for 44 years. We were named the top leader in the quadrant, Gartner quadrant, for the 7th consecutive year, and we were named by 3 other major analysts as a leader in machine learning, AI, and data science, a heritage we're extremely proud of. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to Glenda Crisp. Glenda is the Chief Data Officer and Executive responsible for enterprise data and architecture for NAB. She is responsible for building and running the data platforms, including the new data lake. Prior to joining NAB, Glenda was a Senior Vice President and Chief Data Officer for TD Bank Group in Canada, where she set the enterprise data strategy and led the build-out of the data governance and management capabilities for the bank. The majority of Glenda's career has been in technology, with increasingly senior roles, including CIO. She's a highly regarded leader and known for backing her people, providing opportunity and accountability for her teams, and for her focus on delivering to the business. Glenda's topic for today is how NAB uses speech analytics to improve customer experience and compliance, and it sounds like there could be a bit of a balancing act there. So I would invite you now to, as you listen to Glenda, post your questions in the Q&A area of the screen. So over to you, Glenda.
Thank you very much, Lynette. It's my pleasure to be here. I didn't prepare any slides because I thought I could just sit and have a chat for 20 minutes and let you know what we've been up to and how we're approaching data and more specifically speech analytics. I definitely want to leave a fair chunk of time for questions, so you can grill me as you like. So just to kind of start with NAB's approach to data and analytics, data is at the center of understanding our customers, meeting regulatory obligations, and of course, enabling our strategic ambition, which is to serve customers well and help our communities prosper. So we're really focusing on using it not only to improve customer experience, by which I mean know them better, so things like responsible lending. We also want to serve our customers better, which would mean tailored products and services. And also, because we're a bank, we take very seriously the need to protect our customers' data and to protect our customers from things like fraud. And lastly, for those of you in the data space, I think you know it's important to also treat customers fairly and to ensure that we're taking an ethical approach to the use of data, machine learning, and AI. So we've undertaken a multi-year journey. We're not only building a data lake, we're building advanced analytics capabilities, but we're also uplifting the skills of the entire organization. We recently went through the annual analytics impact report that MBS did, and that ranked us as an explorer. So we are very focused on ensuring that we align our analytics priorities with the business strategy and business outcomes. We do have a roadmap between current and future state, and we've got very strong sponsorship at NAB in terms of the value of data and how we need to be investing in that capability. I did mention our investment in uplifting skills. Just to give you a sense of that, we have a data and analytics skills that have 2,500 members. So this covers the spectrum from data stewardship all the way through to machine learning. And we've had some really fun play days on our advanced analytics platform, where we get groups of people together and they build a model in a day and just get hands-on tools and build some capability and have some fun at the same time. We've also at NAB been investing pretty seriously into cloud skill. As of now, over the course of the last 3 years, we've trained up 7,000 people in cloud, and over 1,300 of them actually have made it to the certification level at AWS. And we're now seeing an equivalent ramp up in Azure certification. So the approach to data and analytics and just technology in general and uplifting our skills is a big investment that we're making. So I'm assuming most people know what speech analytics is, but just in case there are those who aren't that familiar with it, it's essentially the ability to have an artificial intelligence engine transcribe and analyze a customer's calls. So it takes unstructured data that's trapped in the recordings, emails, chat transcripts, etc., and matches it up with structured metadata, such as which agent handled the interaction, the time of day it occurred, the length of the call, who the customer was, and then we undergo a speech recognition process that turns the sound into text. So this technology really automates a range of operational processes for us, and it includes multiple types of technology, everything from call recording to speech recognition and transcription, searching by keywords, extraction of actionable insights, conversation quality management, behavioral analysis, etc. So there's a wide range of capabilities that have to be brought together to really do speech analytics well. So first up, thought I'd talk about how we've done it and what we've done. I will highlight the use within the NAB Assist area. So NAB Assist is an area of the bank that really helps customers that have traditionally been challenged in repaying loans, but we really beefed that up during the COVID events of last year. So NAB Assist used speech analytics to support compliance monitoring over the conversations with our customers who had paused their home loan repayments during COVID. So the compliance check was run over what we called the check-in calls, which was at the midpoint of the deferral, and on the expiry calls, so just before the deferral ended. And the purpose of this scenario was to ensure that the appropriate disclosures were being made by our bankers to our customers. We also were seeking to understand their sentiment and ensure that the right treatment plan was being applied. So this was not just about compliance, but also looking after our customers and ensuring they were getting what was needed. So I would like to point out that I very firmly believe in a certain philosophy, which is not new and I didn't make up. I'm relatively sure I lifted it from Google. But I believe that data has gravity, and therefore we really need to bring models to the data. I don't believe it's sustainable, at least not for a bank, to be shipping large amounts of data outside the organization to a model. And given the type of data we hold, I'm just generally uncomfortable with sending large amounts of it outside. So we partnered with Deloitte and a tool they have called TrueVoice. Now, TrueVoice started out as a software as a service offering, which would have meant we would have had to ship our data out. But we worked really closely with them to essentially create a containerized deployment outside of Deloitte's environment that runs in our environment on AWS. The processing engine that they have has proprietary algorithms to convert audio to text and to perform sentiment analysis. So they use the machine learning algorithms and they apply speech analytics for feature extraction, but this is all now performed securely on our NAB Discovery Cloud. You'll hear me refer to NDC, our NDC platform on AWS. We now, it also then makes sure that, as running it in our environment, we also ensure that all of our governance processes, our ethical framework is applied, our privacy framework is applied, all of the security controls, et cetera, are all applied, and it's running containerized within our space. So that's been a huge uplift for us. I would note, just for those that are the techies in the crowd, TrueVoice does take advantage of ECS, which is Elastic Container Service, which is from AWS, and that helps to complete the processing flow for each call that is submitted to the application. And we have a fully automated pipeline using capabilities like AWS Lambda and Amazon Simple Queue Service to filter only the relevant calls that have been loaded into the lake. So NDC, which is our advanced analytics platform, Nav Discovery Cloud, hooks up to NDH, Nav Data Hub, which is our lake. Both of them are on AWS, and the voice recordings is flowing through the lake to NDC, where we apply the TrueVoice model. As I said, I believe data has gravity, and so you want to bring the model to the data. The other piece is the governance that goes around all of that. So our first step in any use case at NAB is the ethical consideration. So we first ask, should we do this, before we start getting into the can we do this technically. And I know that a lot of my techie friends, they prefer the can we conversations because those are the fun and challenging ones. But I think before we spend a lot of time, we really need to ask the ethical question. And in this case, it was pretty straightforward. We were looking not only to ensure compliance, but also to ensure that we were helping our customers in the best way possible. So implementation considerations for those of you thinking of doing something different. Obviously, the first one that I keep hammering the point home, bringing the model to the data. I would say Deloitte's been an outstanding partner in that regard. And I do know that this is challenging for many startups, but I do find that it's, because we're talking about building on AWS and all of the same technology capabilities, it's a relatively simple conversation for us. Data and metadata and those linkages were a challenge. Finding the ability to work with a reliable data set, you really want a really good training set. And so we had to spend a good sizable investment in appropriately tagging the right calls so that we were training the model appropriately. Something else that you do need to consider is building the skills. So when you do partner with somebody, you do need to think through the skills you need to build so that you can not only run it on an ongoing basis, but that you can continue to expand and build more models independently. The other piece that I would note is we actually spent a fair chunk of time doing proof of concept. So we started looking at this technology before COVID. So this wasn't like COVID happened and we were scrambling. We had already started looking at it from a compliance point of view, just generally. And so with COVID, the impact of that was just to accelerate our implementation timeline and really help focus the organization on getting it up and running faster than potentially would have been done previously. And then the final consideration that I would highlight for anybody looking to do these types of models is to ensure that you're investing in auditing and tuning. You do need to commit to ongoing reviews. You can't expect 100% accuracy, and so you do need to understand where there are exceptions. So where there's an issue related to audio quality or accents or different language usage. And as a Canadian, I can tell you that the Australian language is quite unique. I'm still not sure how you get Arvo out of afternoon, but that's a whole other conversation. Now, in terms of the results that we've seen so far, we implemented this late last year, and the first components of TrueVoice were deployed with more than 60,000 outbound COVID check-in calls. And we actually were able to identify where we had some missing deferral disclosures, which then meant we had a short list of customers that we needed to call and make sure that we had correctly given them that information. And in some cases that they were, so essentially because we identified those customers, they got a higher rating in terms of priority for a return phone call. We also ran all of these calls through a vulnerability model that we also built on TrueVoice. And this flagged a couple hundred customer calls that we thought we should listen to manually because the customer may be experiencing additional distress. And then once we listened to those manually, that translated into a few customers that we needed to reach out to and really give them additional support. I will say that the scale of checking that we did here, we covered 100% of the calls, whereas traditional approaches would have meant sampling. And if we had done it the old approach, it would have taken us about 7 years to manually execute what we did with TrueVoice. So the fact that we were able to do that so quickly, pinpoint customers that needed additional help was hugely helpful. And then the last thing that I would say is that the outcome of this is also a tool that can help us assist our quality assurance coaches as they work with our bankers so that we can actually improve the customer experience. So it's not just about compliance, it's also about a better customer experience. And so where we can see calls that have gone quite well, the compliance has been met, and there's been good sentiment, then we look to take those learnings and coach others so that they can benefit from it. So I'm going to wrap up quickly before Q&A on what's next for us. So we went live with an MVP version. We're finishing out all of our industrialization this month. And I've got a backlog of additional use cases to put through the model. Again, primarily starting from a compliance quality point of view and uplifting customer experience. And then the final thing that we're really focused on is building our internal skills. So this is both within our contact center and within our technology teams. So within the contact center, we're training people up on how to really understand tagging so that as we look to train additional models, the contact center people, there'll be a few of them that can tag calls so that we train models appropriately in the future and we're not dependent on external support for that. And on the data team on my side, we're looking at upskilling more and more data scientists to use this tooling and to know when to use it versus other capabilities. So I'm going to stop there and open up for questions.
Thank you, Glenda. That was really fascinating. And actually, as you spoke through how you approach this, like I'm reminded of the 3 S's around customer analytics, which is starting with the strategy and intent, looking at the stack and the right technology choices, and then the skills piece, which you finished with, was a great use case for customer analytics. As I look at the questions coming on now, so the first question I have is, what was the time frame from project commencement to the first COVID model?
I guess it depends on where you can start from, because we actually started POCing, so proof of concept, TrueVoice, I'm going to say, well, we had done an initial POC back in January, and then we did a deeper dive one in roughly May, June, and then implementation was late September. So kind of 8 to 9 months from kind of idea. So bit of time. But the actual implementation in the MVP was relatively quick. I think one of the bigger challenges for us was finding the right sources of data. So which call recording systems to go after. So we landed Zoom calls and then our Genesis platform.
Thank you, Glenda. I think you also mentioned that had you been doing this manually, it would have taken 7 years. So another interesting question we have is language, accent, you touched on this a little bit, and audio quality are really challenging in all speech-to-text models. How did you manage it, and any thoughts on discrimination biases where models' performance was different on these attributes? So two-part question there.
Yeah, so on the language and accents, that did factor into the training, and as I mentioned, it's one of the considerations you do need to be looking at. I don't know that you're going to be able to tune it perfectly, so there is some, this is where the auditing piece comes in to make sure that we're catching the right things. On terms of the discrimination and biases, we actually do have a bias process that's part of our model governance. So step one is identifying, and you get a peer challenge session in, and where do we think the types of bias will be? And then we actively test for it, and again, monitor for it. I would say in terms of accuracy, percentage of accuracy for tuning, just on the first part, we looked for about 80% accuracy. Again, we were dealing with a very urgent problem, so we weren't looking to get to 100%. We started at 80%, and then we were going to evolve and uplift over time. So I kind of went back and forth on those two parts, sorry.
You answered, touched on the next question, which was around percentage of accuracy as well. So another question we have is, how does NAV utilize differential privacy to ensure individual privacy in speech analytics?
Yep, so I'm going to take that in two parts, and really it's kind of a two-step process. First is we have actually our data scientists have built a model that we call Spider. I don't really know why we called it that. Sure, they'll tell me there's some good reason. But it actually is going through and identifying the personally identifiable information. And we're constantly evolving that model so that it takes into consideration new patterns and new data types to consider. Then once we know where the PII does, it depends on the use case. So in some use cases like this, where we really needed to know which customer we had given the right information to, or if we had not provided the information to, we still did need to retain customer information. But there are other speech analytics models where we would apply either obfuscation or differential privacy techniques. And that is a capability that we're continuing to build within the bank. And so it's quite dependent on the use case as to whether you apply obfuscation or differential privacy or some other technique.
I think you've got the techies going here. Was there any falsely identified non-deferral disclosures, false positives?
I'm not sure. Let me ping somebody and see if I can get an answer on that.
You touched on some of this as you went through how you start with that ethical consideration, but then the question is, how do you balance the use of those speech analytics to serve the purpose of the customer experience whilst also keeping your eye on the compliance, and when do these two goals sometimes come into conflict?
Yeah, I mean, look, compliance is compliance, and there are ways to do that well or not well. And so I actually think this capability is going to help us in the future identify the sentiment of calls. So if we can find, let's say, a banker that seems really good at ticking all the compliance boxes, but they're also really good at this, like the engagement with the customer and the positive sentiment, then we're going to want to learn from that conversation style and approach and apply it more generally to others so that we can both meet compliance and have a good customer experience. So we're just starting to be able to dig into that now because we can look at the full breadth of calls. Whereas before we would have been learning that from a sampling basis.
Thanks, Glenda. If you had one wish for any gap you see in the solution, what would that be?
Well, look, as I said, Deloitte's been an outstanding partner, and we basically have asked them to shift their model, and they've done so. I guess for me, it would have been nice if it was already containerized and ready to run in our platform, because we did spend a fair chunk of time with them doing that. We obviously won't need to be doing that again in the future. But that was one that I think if it had already been there, then we would have gone even faster, frankly. And then for us, you know, the skill level on tagging data so that it can be used for training is one that we need to continue to build. I think it's only going to become more important for us as we go forward. And I'm sorry, I haven't been able to get an answer on were there any false positives, but I'm still hoping my team is trying to figure that one out for me. I'm sure there were false positives. I'm just not sure if they were related specifically to identifying non-deferral disclosures. So I'm sure we came across them, but I'm just not sure in what context.
Thank you, Glenda. This has been a great customer story, especially, you know, being very conscious of vulnerable people during COVID. So I congratulate the bank on this project and yourself and your team. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. Huge shout out to my team and to Deloitte and to everybody at NAB that made this happen. It's just, to my mind, what I found really heartening was that we set out to make sure that we were doing the right thing by our customers. And we then found customers that were in additional distress and that we could help them in other ways. And that, to me, is the power of these types of solutions, where you can not just solve the surface problem, but really help at a root level.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Hello everybody, my name is Hugh Williams. It's a great pleasure to be back again. I've got a really great pleasure to introduce to you a very good friend of mine, James Cameron. And James is absolutely one of the good guys in Australian venture investment. Really, really top guy, and I think doing amazing things for the Australian startup ecosystem. More formally, James is a partner at Airtree Ventures. And of course, he loves working with ambitious founders to build great businesses, particularly in enterprise software, security, fintech, and consumer internet. At Airtree, he currently leads their investments into Prosper, Drone Deploy, Athena, a Cloud Guru, Huddle, and Secure Code Warrior. James is from Canberra, so we can ask him about roundabouts and what it was like growing up in Canberra in a moment. But he spent the last decade all over the world, living and working in Europe, the Silicon Valley, and also in China. Prior to Airtree, he was a vice president at Excel Partners in London, where he worked with a bunch of well-known, successful companies that were investments of Excel. He, before that, was based in the Silicon Valley, as I said earlier, where he founded and ran a company called BitSync, which was a SaaS-based research platform for investment management. He's also spent some time in the tech banking team at Morgan Stanley and as a corporate lawyer. So you can ask him your legal questions later on. I'm sure he'd be very happy to answer those. James has an MBA from Stanford, and he's also got a science degree and a law degree from the University of New South Wales. So it's my great pleasure to introduce a very good friend of mine, James Cameron, who's going to talk to us today about scaling your analytics startup in Australia, tips to avoid hitting the wall. So I'll hand over to you, James. Welcome.
Thanks, Hugh. Thank you very much for having me. I've been looking forward to sitting down on this. I'm based up here in Sydney, so unfortunately couldn't make it down, but it's a wonderful conference to be part of, and I think this is something that's very dear to my heart, driving recovery and growth through analytics. And I wanted to take a real particular bent and focus as part of this session on driving growth through startups, and in particular startups in the analytics space. As many people on this conference will know, startups are a real key driver of any economic recovery. They're a key driver of jobs. Fast-growing companies across the economy, in particular in technology, are a real driver of jobs creation. And so I wanted to really run us through a session in sort of two parts. The first part is going to be a quick spin through some of the data around startup funding in Australia, and in particular around analytics startups. This will be pretty general. Hopefully there's a lot in here for a general audience. And then the second part, really, I want to shift gears and aim a little bit at people who might have started a startup in the analytics space or in other areas, who might be thinking about starting their own business down the track. And to talk through some of the tips on how to become one of Australia's next startup success stories, and in particular how to avoid some of the traps and avoid becoming a statistic, being one of the many startups that don't go on to become successful companies. And so let me start. Firstly, I won't bore you with the details here. A few of the logos have dropped off this slide, but Hugh did a pretty good job of introducing me. I think the only thing that probably is worth calling out is that I've been on both sides of the table, on the startup side and on the VC side. I know which one I'm better at. I'm certainly better at the investing side than the startup side. But I've also been on the investing side, both from outside Australia looking in and from here in Australia. At Excel, a big chunk of our business was investing in Aussie startups, and we were lucky enough to invest in some great ones like Atlassian and Campaign Monitor and Xero in New Zealand. And so we really saw the sort of that first generation of really high-profile startups coming through Australia, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to come home. I'd been away for about 15 years and was seeing such quality companies coming through. And so it's exciting now to be able to back some of these companies from an earlier stage and help them become the next Atlassian or the next Canva, etc. And this is part of what got me really excited when I first started thinking about coming back to Australia. Let me, yes. This is a little bit out of date, actually. This is a chart showing the general growth of companies who have sort of broken out to $100 million plus in enterprise value by the year founded. This is a slide that obviously our investors love, and it's one that I get really excited about because it just shows the density of startups coming through that are starting to break out and become genuinely global success stories. And this is still fairly out of date. I think there's a whole nother cohort just from 2020 that have had real tailwinds off the back of COVID that we could add to this slide. But it just shows to show the sheer quantity of great breakout companies that are coming out of the Australian ecosystem. And this is part of the reason why. This is the data around funding, both funding into VC funds in Australia on the left there. The blue chart, the blue lines there are the aggregate dollars raised by venture capital funds, and on the right hand side is the venture dollars invested into startups in Australia. And you can see a clear trend in that that's running up to 2020. Really, there's never been a better time if you're a startup founder to raise money for your venture in Australia, which is great news. But at the same time, it's incredibly underserved. This is venture funding, OECD countries, venture funding as a percentage of GDP. And we're all the way down there at the wrong side of that graph. You can see the arrow there. Lower even than our cousins across the ditch in New Zealand and many other countries where you would expect we would be more competitive with in terms of innovation economy and dollars invested into venture money. So there is a hell of a lot of headroom in here, and part of why I'm so excited to be in this ecosystem is that it does feel like we are in the early stages of this act. But shifting specifically to analytics startups, which I think will be interesting for the audience here, this again has even been even greater relative growth in the funding available for analytics startups. This is the dollar amounts and the deals done. And actually, in the last couple of years, you can see that the deals done, the orange line there, has started to cap out a little bit, but the dollars invested has really increased significantly. And that just goes to show that the size of the rounds that are going into analytics-specific startups in Australia has increased substantially going back 3-4 years ago. And there's a good reason for that. Some of these startups are really starting to hit breakout velocity and attracting large amounts of capital, both from local funds like us at Entry and international funds, US VCs that are flying into town to make these investments. And this is where the money's flowing. Now, oftentimes when people think about analytics startups, they think about infrastructure, tools for analytics, tools for data scientists, tools for AI machine learning. That is a big part of the startups that get funded, these general purpose tools. But much, much more significant are vertically specific startups going after verticals such as healthcare, fintech, industrials, with analytics being a core part of what they do and how they deliver their technology. And so we've got a series of comes in here that you can see some of the more breakout success stories that have started to emerge from some of these areas. Harrison AI and HealthMatch are two high-profile companies applying core analytics to various healthcare use cases. HyperAnna and RoboBuy are two companies in our portfolio. HyperAnna selling data visualization software into many of the large financial services and insurance companies in Australia and globally. And RoboBuy is a startup that sells to procurement teams in all sorts of companies across all sorts of industries to enable them to run analytics across their procurement spend globally. And then, of course, in fintech, you'll see large amounts, given the focus that Australia has on fintech businesses and the emergence of that area, and also industrials, of course. I think that healthcare is a really interesting one to call out, and I think that it's not surprising to me that this has become such a big vertical for analytics applications in Australia. We are, as many of you know, one of only a handful of countries that have pretty comprehensive national healthcare data sets. We have Medicare data on most of the 24 million people, as well as national records on prescription drug use. That is rare, and it's an opportunity for analytics startups to tap into. So I'm not surprised that has become such a big chunk. So that's a quick canter through where the money is being spent on analytics. I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk to those people out there that may be founders or thinking about founders. And I want to talk a little bit about the myth behind Silicon Valley. This is a space I spent a lot of my time, and I know Hugh spent a good chunk of his career in as well. And I think there is a lot of glamour to the myth, but I think it's worth sort of deconstructing it. Here's what you often hear about why Silicon Valley in particular is a great place to do a startup. All you need to do, according to popular myth, is get some friends together and start a company, much like these guys here. You find a garage, find a co-working space or a share house and spend a year or two building a product. And then you hack your way to some customers, you get some initial traction, and then suddenly you fast forward and money starts raining from the sky. That's the sort of the popular myth in Silicon Valley. And it's one that sort of gets repeated ad infinitum in places outside Silicon Valley as a model that, that people want to aspire to. But the reality, of course, is very different. The reality about Silicon Valley is that it's not special because it has a lot of startups. The reality of Silicon Valley is a special place because it's, in my view, still the greatest place on the globe to scale a startup. And when we talk about building the Australian ecosystem to encourage more of these startups to come through, and particularly more analytics and enterprise tech companies to come through, is that we have to understand that elements around scaling a startup, not just starting a startup, are some of the most important things we can do. And it's something that we spend a lot of time doing at Airtree and generally in the ecosystem, is try and create the conditions for startups, not just to get started and get their first few customers, but to really start scaling up. And to dive in deeper here, I wanted to talk you through, this is a framework that Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn, he teaches a course for Stanford analytics students who are interested in starting their own startup. And he teaches, it's called blitzscaling, which is a bit of an evocative title, but the general idea is that to create a successful category-leading multi-generational company, you have to go through a whole series of different phases. The first one, he calls it the family, which is typically when there's up to 10 people sitting around a table building a product. You probably don't have any customers yet. You certainly don't have a ton of revenue, but at that stage, you are really genuinely in that phase that we would call the startup. From there, you sort of transition into this period where you're starting to sell into customers. You're starting to identify a customer base that really wants the product that you've built, hopefully. And you start to move from early stages, call it sort of $1 million or so in revenue, up to 10 million or so in revenue. And this is really what we would call scale up. And for us, most of the work that we do with startups is in this transition period when they're going from 10 or so people up to maybe 100, and they're starting to figure out how to sell their product and how to go to market. And the good news is once you're through this phase, once you're at 10 million in revenue, you're largely unkillable. Your destiny is in your own hand. It's very hard for businesses who get to that point to disappear overnight. They often don't wind up being the multi-billion-dollar unicorns that their founders hope, but they are stable enough to continue growing for the most part. The bad news is that scale-up period in the middle between $1 and $10 million in revenue is some of the hardest work you ever do as a startup founder. And that applies to every type of startup in every category, be it consumer marketplaces through to enterprise analytics startups. There is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in this phase. And I think importantly, in Australia, pound for pound, there's still probably more blood, sweat, and tears in this phase for an Australian startup based here than there is for a startup based in Silicon Valley, which is what we're trying to change. And just to put some data around that, I wanted to pull out the what we call graduation rates, which is the data around how many companies that raise a seed round, and that is oftentimes sort of up to $1 million from friends, family, angel investors. How many startups that do that then go on to raise a Series A, which is often sort of $2 to $10 million, and then a Series B, and then a Series C and beyond. And that's typically the route that startups take both here and in the US. And so this is the line for the US. This would suggest that a lot of companies that raise a C don't go on to raise a Series A and Series B, and the drop-off is quite steep. As you'd expect, startups are a high-risk area. Now, if you overlay that same data in Europe, you see that the numbers come down a little bit, suggesting it's harder to graduate to those later stages in Europe. And then if you then overlay the data in Australia, you see it's lower again. Now, this data is for cohorts from 2009 to 2016. And I did that deliberately because that's given those cohorts enough time to season and go on and raise those follow-on rounds. And it's also general for startups across the board. So it's not just analytics, it's not just enterprise software, but it is technology startups, digital technology startups across the board. But I think it's telling. And if you actually zoom in on this part here, the difference is quite dramatic. If you've raised a seed round in Australia, you're about 2/3 as likely to go on and raise a Series A as the same company in the US. And at Series C and beyond, it drops to about less than half as likely. So it's pretty substantial drop-offs. And if there's one thing that we really want to focus on as the Startup Oz ecosystem is to try and lift those rates up. So try and increase the number of companies across the board who are going on to raise those future rounds and to become breakout successes. So on that basis, some tips on how to get through that stage and really do come out the other end as a successful company. And I'm going to canter through these because some of them will be very relevant to founders in the audience and others less so. Obviously, the most important is managing your cash. This sounds stupid, and I sound stupid saying it, but the reality is that in so many cases, especially deeply technical founders focused on analytics business, you can be so hard at work building out the product and trying to solve a problem with your headphones on and trying to nail a solution that oftentimes you put your head up for air from time to time, and you might find that you've only got a few months of cash runway, by which time it's already too late. So being able to extract yourself from the core solution and really focus on fundraising, selling externally, making sure you've got the cash to keep the lights on is the #1 priority, as always. Number 2 priority, which is the #1 reason why companies fail, even more so than running out of cash, is that they're solving a problem people don't care about. We see this time and time again, especially, again, deeply technical co-founders who have a real affinity to a problem. Oftentimes you'll find that they are diving into an area without having done a lot of customer diligence and customer needs finding. And I think the most important thing to do when you're in that early stage is not to try and solve a problem, it's to try and speak to customers. And this is particularly true in analytics because you'll often find that founders will come from a background of having a very, very specific knowledge around how to solve a specific analytics problem, but that may not be a universal problem for a larger customer set, and it may not be one of their top 2 or 3 problems, which is a good proxy for whether or not you have a good product market fit to go after. So I always recommend tech founders to go out and spend their first few months at least when they start a business talking to customers. Talk to 50, 60 customers before you put down a single line of code. And I think the reason that that's particularly relevant is that startups are, in effect, just a series of experiments. That's really all startups are. And oftentimes people focus around running the wrong experiment. This is a chart that you'll see in a lot of startup literature around building a minimum viable product, MVP. Oftentimes people will think that building an MVP is trying to solve the technical problem that their startup is going after, rather than trying to run a series of experiments around the package of the entire package of the product. You have to understand whether or not you can solve the problem, but you also have to run experiments as to whether or not that problem is valuable for your customers, whether the problem will be usable when packaged in the right way, and whether or not it will delight or really excite your customers. And finding and running an experiment that enables you to hit as many of those different assumptions as possible is incredibly important. And I'll give you a specific example when it comes to analytics startups. What we often find is that people will go out and they will try and test things that are in the bottom of this pyramid here on the left-hand side. When they're building analytics or machine learning specific startups, they will try and specifically they will go out and try and test their model in real life and to try and make sure they bottom out all the areas of problematic areas and issues that they can find in it before they go and put it in front of customers. I would posit that that's a mistake. You can experiment with customers with a model that may be half-baked, that may not have that everything worked out in it, but is packaged in a way that at least gets the impression of what the eventual product might look like. And you get that in front of customers and you start iterating based on that feedback. It's incredibly important to start getting that customer feedback in very early. Last couple of slides. This one, I think, is a important slide for anyone who's and feels like they've got a product that they can start to build a sales team or a go-to-market team around. Australia in particular has had a huge amount of success with companies that have a very lightweight, high-volume sales model. If you think about companies like Atlassian, where they're selling to developers around the world for a couple of $1,000s per person that oftentimes are being put on their company credit card and just selling huge volumes of it, they tend to be the standout success stories in the Australian market. And it makes sense. They're great strategies. But if you're selling analytics software and you're selling it to enterprises, that's very, very difficult. You're going to be selling much larger contracts. You're going to be selling to many stakeholders in a business. And the reality is that same go-to-market that works for Atlassian and Canva probably won't work for you. And so not being afraid of finding salespeople, professional salespeople, developing international offices where you can sell those bits of software into large companies is important. So don't go with the one-size-fits-all sales model that you often see in Australia. Lastly, this is very relevant to our line of work, we still, unfortunately, see founders taking terms from angel investors or renegade VCs that are really can really handicap a business in the long term. And so be very, very careful around the terms that you take from investors. Make sure that they are professional investors that are at least thinking through terms in a way that increases the likelihood of success of the startup. They're thinking about increasing the pie rather than taking more of the pie. And we've seen some pretty archaic terms floating around the Australian ecosystem that can really handicap you. So it's worth making sure that you're comparing them. Do your homework. Read term sheets that you'll see on venture investors' website. We have our own up there, and make sure that you've checked out that you're not signing up to anything that's not market standard. Anyway, that's I only had 20 minutes, so I wanted to make sure that we covered as much of that as possible. But I'm going to hand back to Hugh, I think, who's going to probably fire some questions at me.
Fabulous, James. Wonderful. An awesome tour of not only startups in Australia, but those that are in the analytics and data world. I'd love to just ask you out of the gate. So you obviously see a lot of different pitch decks, and I'm sure you see plenty in the data and analytics space. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the gut feel you have about what's a startup worth looking at in this space and what's a startup that's not worth looking at in this space? And I think you've given us one clue, which is technology for technology's sake is the biggest reason that startups fail. But beyond that, give us some clues about what a good pitch deck and a bad pitch deck looks like for you.
Yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit about the stage that we're looking at. Most of the companies we look at are sort of seed stage or Series A stage, which means they don't really often have a lot of customers. And so you can't throw a spreadsheet at the business to try and understand whether or not it's going to be successful. What you really need to do is get in front of the people. And so much of what we do is try and understand what makes the founders tick, why they have a particular competitive advantage going after the area that they're going after, and what really is their superpower. There's no template for being a great startup founder. There's no, the popular culture would suggest that they're sort of, you're wearing hoodies and trainers and hanging out in Surrey Hills in Sydney or in Soma in San Francisco. It couldn't be further from the truth. There's no template for this sort of stuff. But what we do try and do is identify on what dimension these founders are great, are an outlier. And that's the most important thing for us at early stage. And that can be anything. That can be founders that have a particular deep technical insight into an area that is very, very difficult to come by, that they've earned through many, many years at the coalface doing that work. Or it could be they have a particular flair for sales and marketing or building the right messaging to bring their product to market. Or it could simply be that they have an incredible resilience and a grit and determination and can walk through crushed glass to get to their objective. All of these are outliers that we've invested against and successfully. So really, I think what we try and focus on the pitch decks and certainly in those first meetings is what is it about these founders that provide a particular competitive advantage. Beyond that, the product and the product market fit are probably the next most important things. If there is a product in market, trying to identify whether or not their customers love it. And by that, very rarely you can figure that out through revenue. Revenue is a proxy for customer love, but really it's a pretty bad proxy, and it's a slow moving proxy for it too. What we prefer to do is really identify, based on the analytics that the company is collecting around the customer behavior on their product. Are they using it? Are they using it on a regular basis? Are they getting really strong ROI off it? They're the elements that we want to be able to see for product market fit. Anyway, so that's they're the two biggest things we look for.
Yeah, awesome. Question from the audience. So it's not surprising, and I think very sobering, given the graph you showed about Series A, Series B, and Series C funding, and the lack of achievement of that and success in achieving that in startups, that many great Australians leave Australia to go and build their companies. So what do you think Australia needs to do differently to retain its tech talented people? And many are in fact getting poached before they even finish their degrees.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that keeps me up at night, or at least it used to. I think the last year or so has really helped. Having navigated this current crisis in the way that we have, there's been a huge influx of very talented Australians coming back to the country after having picked up great experience overseas. And so we've really tried to capitalize that and try and make sure that those people coming back are plugged into startups and are excited about getting in and helping the ecosystem here. Hugh, you yourself were a great example. You came back a bit before COVID, but people like yourself coming back from overseas who can really get stuck in and help with the environment that is a big tailwind. But I think it's more than that. I don't think government can do a lot of this. I think there's often people look to government to try and lead the way here. I think the best thing that government can do for the most part is just get out of the way and set up a good playing field for founders to start companies. But really after that, sort of get out of the way. I think the funding has improved significantly, but there's a long way to go, and I think we'll continue to try and chip away at that. I think there's a lot of excitement from our superannuation funds and our other institutional investors to get exposure to this part of the asset class. So I think that will continue to increase. I think the biggest challenge in a lot of this is ambition, and I'm really pleased to have seen that ratchet up in the last couple of years since I've been back. The level of ambition that I see startup founders having now compared to even 5 years ago is much, much higher. People aren't starting businesses anymore expecting that they might be one of the top Australian players in their space. They really are starting businesses hoping to be the number one global player in that space. And that takes time, and it takes examples. People need to see companies like Canva, like a Cloud Guru down in Melbourne, become multi-billion-dollar companies before it really starts to round home that could be them one day as well. And the more of those we have, the more the snowball will continue to grow.
That's great. And look, Alan Zhao, who's listening today, sent in a question, and I think it's a nice follow-up to the same topic, James. But if you're an Australian student in Australia, or you're if somebody's looking to found a startup in Australia, is there a way you can leverage the Silicon Valley to do your data or analytics startup in Australia if you can't move there or you don't want to move to the US?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there shouldn't be any reason you need to move to the US to do a startup. In fact, there's a huge competitive advantage to building the startup here locally. Oftentimes, you might need to go over there to sell to customers, and when you're big enough, you probably need to go over there to pick up sales and marketing, go-to-market talent, and start to build a US office. But when you take into account the cost of salaries to build a development team and the R&D tax credits you get, and the multitudes of great technical talent that we have in Australia, there's a huge competitive advantage of building your developer team here and selling overseas. And I think that's a big difference. You should keep the ambition of selling to international customers, but there's no reason you need to go outside to build your development team anymore.
That's awesome. I think that's very good news for anybody who's thinking about getting stuck in here in Australia.
And come talk to us. Our details are all over the web. You can't miss it.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, and as I say, James is one of the good guys of the Australian startup scene, so I highly recommend that if anybody is planning on starting a startup. Maybe a little bit of a darker question, James. I mean, it was pretty tough to look at the failure of startups from the early stage funding to Series A, whether it's in the US, Europe, or here in Australia. How do you know when you're putting in all that blood, sweat, and tears and doing that incredible hard work, when to push on and when to give up?
That's a great question. I think this is one of the dark secrets of startups. In that many cases, the statistics are against you. And we talk about our founders. We try to encourage our founders to make decisions based on data all the time. And we sort of forget about the one big decision that they made at the very start of their startup goes against all the data out there, which is startups are more likely to fail than they are to succeed. And I think the issue with that, though, is that it forgets the idea that many founders do 2, 3, 4 ideas before they hit on that one really good product market fit. And those numbers are obviously, those failures, so to speak, are reflected in there. But the one thing that Silicon Valley has always had really, really strong culture of is failing fast and moving on to the next idea. Now, that can encourage you to be indecisive and flit around. And so I think there is an element of you need a little bit of grit and determination to break through those initial walls. But I think if you are getting your product out in front of customers, and you should always ask the customers who have seen the product whether or not, how upset they would be on a scale of 1 to 10 if your product disappeared tomorrow. And if all of them say that they would be, slightly annoyed but not really that upset, that's probably a good chance to think about pivoting your business because you don't have product market fit. If they all say that this is fantastic and I would be mortified if you ever took it out from under me, that is a great example of product market fit. And keep going, try and work through those challenges and try to build a business there.
Yeah, great advice. Well, James, I think we're close to time and we've taken a good chunk of your valuable afternoon up there in Sydney. We deeply appreciate here at the Melbourne Business School and the Melbourne Analytics Conference you spending time with us. I think there's a lot of wise words in there and I'm sure the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. So thank you very much for your time. And I will now hand back to Anita, who's going to take us on to the next session.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, James. It's fabulous to hear your stories. So, Hugh, this will be ending off our day, so there will be no more sessions, at least for today. But I'd love to give you, obviously, a quick recap on day 3 of our Business Analytics Conference. So we opened today with Professor Steve Tedelis talking about the power of drip pricing. So one of the great things about this conference is we're really seeking to increase transparency of all those algorithms and what goes on in that black box. So Steve shared 2 different effects that occur with drip pricing, which is effectively not revealing the final price of what you're purchasing online until you get to the checkout point. So he talked about the quantity effect, which is that increase in purchasers because they look at a lower price at the outset and think, oh, I can afford this. So there's an effect of increased people interested in your product. Secondly, he talked about the quality upgrade effect. So, the idea that people will upgrade their seat and then offer that upgrade to them and see what happens from there. So in terms of what Steve shared, he found that drip pricing obviously was enabled, as expected, that people would abandon their cart when they got to the checkout point and realized that, well, you had originally told me that this would be 15% cheaper when I first saw the price. And then how might savvy commercial organizations choose to try to optimize that you don't abandon your cart when you get to that stage. Secondarily, obviously, he talked about the most important part of loss aversion, I guess, trying to maximize the feeling that, well, I don't really want to abandon this cart. I've already gone through the whole process of putting in all my credit card information and doing everything else before you go ahead and abandon that cart. So it was really interesting to see the research entities plow through so much data ticketing data to see what would happen in that scenario where drip pricing was used and how it changes consumer behavior in that scenario. And then we had actually Hugh welcome his good friend and former colleague, Julie Farago from Verily Life Sciences, and her emphasis on identifying the critical user journey. What do you want to focus on first? And many of you are watching and thinking about how do I, as James was saying, scale my first analytics startup? Where do I start? It was great to hear Julie talk about, within such a large organization, Alphabet, the Verily Life Sciences journey of developing on Duo, that diabetes blood glucose monitoring app and software. So it was amazing what they were able to pinpoint by looking at individual user data where those blood glucose spikes occurred. And she shared the example of the micro level analytics they were able to do where they found blood glucose spiking in the morning. So is it the toast and jam that's causing that? So and that's putting the user back in control of their own blood glucose level by identifying if you didn't eat toast and jam in the morning, then perhaps you could control that, and to really see those changes be commercialized within the system and for the users to love that experience. So it's sort of trying to identify the area in the ocean that you do want to boil rather than trying to take that entire global map that she showed us at the beginning of her session and going from there. And then, of course, this day was focused on technology, machine learning, and AI, and that wouldn't have been complete without the two sessions IBM and Microsoft led in talking about unifying data sets and bringing everything together so people can self-service. Colleagues within the organization can take what they need and then drive their own decisions. And that obviously creates great productivity efficiencies that can be gained, but both organizations also flagged the importance of knowing where your data comes from, that data lineage, what types of data sets are used to train your models, obviously to ensure that we mitigate bias where we know it exists. And then we led into a very specific example from Glenda Crisp at the NAB, where she demonstrated very clearly with the NAB Assist engine how speech analytics has actually empowered them to save 7 years of manual work and to be able to offer customers assistance where it's most needed, to be able to identify the most vulnerable customers by listening in, using voice recognition and speech analytics, to be able to jump past 7 years of manual work. So the power of technology and AI, as some of our speakers shared today, really is there to sit side by side with us to enable us. But again, one of my passionate points about throughout this conference week really is about transparency and knowing what's behind there, behind the hood, and how it's designed so that we are more informed users of AI at the end of the day. And then finally, of course, we had James Cameron with Hugh Williams sharing how we go about increasing our analytics startups here in Australia and beyond, as that will be one of the key drivers of recovery and growth is encouraging these startups and seeing ourselves, especially in Melbourne, I think, as a hotbed of startup and entrepreneurial activity here in Melbourne. So that's the quick recap of day 3 of our conference week. As we think about the final day of our conference tomorrow, we will be back for a day focused entirely on healthcare analytics. So this obviously is a very important component of the recovery process. And we're delighted to share that Dr. Kudzai Kanhutu, the Deputy Chief Medical Information Officer from Royal Melbourne Hospital, will be kicking off day 4 for us tomorrow morning. So Kudzai was voted amongst the CIO Australia top 10 2020 CIO 50 of the year. So that list is to celebrate Australia's top 50 senior technology and digital executives, and we're really pleased that Kudzai is able to host her own session on a healthcare analytics-led recovery first thing in the morning, and then joining a healthcare analytics panel chaired by Dr. Jenny George, the CEO of Converge. And you've heard me say this multiple times throughout conference week. The power of those data sets really is in combining them and finding the insights that you can gain and commercialize. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Philip Smart from Epworth Healthcare, along with Mark Alexander from Agenic, who will be exploring combining open data sets with some proprietary data sets on bowel surgery to improve those patient outcomes as well as screening outcomes for us. So really delighted to have that session featured tomorrow. And then, of course, the finale of our Business Analytics Conference, as always, will be our Melbourne Business Analytics Datathon finalist presentations, which will also occur tomorrow to close out our conference week. So the 6 finalist teams that were selected from over 300 participants will be here in our virtual studio to compete for their share in $25,000 in cash prizes. So we do encourage you to tune in tomorrow again, same timing, 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time. We will run a little bit longer tomorrow just for your planning purposes because we have our Datathon prize presentations, which we look to conclude everything by around 2:30 in the afternoon tomorrow. So you'll receive again the links to the on-demand access to day 3 if there are any sessions that you missed, as well as the day 4 link for the final day of Business Analytics Conference Week for 2021. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and thank you for joining us today for Technology, Machine Learning and AI. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you very much.